Book 3. Book 3. The House of Still Waking Dreams. Chapter 1. The Convent That Refused to Retire. Morning at St. Aurelia's Convent was not a holy hush of prayer and incense. It was chaos, real, living chaos in a chipped porcelain mug. The bells still rang every morning at 6, but these days even the bells seemed tired, their clang softened by humidity and gossip. The convent walls, built 2 centuries ago to withstand hurricanes and scandal, now buzzed with both. Time had passed, not too much, but enough to let the dust settle and rise again. Gumbo Dupree, 81 years old and spry enough to argue with the parish pigeons, was the unofficial patriarch of the property. Once a Vietnam vet, now a part-time Etsy bone merchant, retired, under duress and part-time oracle, Gumbo spent his mornings on the back steps feeding Ralph the parrot stale rice crackers and cursing the modern world. His skin had the hue of well-worn leather, his eyes as sharp as when he was 20. His A1C was a mystery even to the lab techs, and his faith, though unconventional, burned steady. Every so often, he still heard whispers from the other side. And sometimes, the other side answered back. Next door in the bonsai garden, Sister Dorothea, now 63, was trimming miniature pines with the focus of a surgeon and the grace of someone who's seen both heaven and hell and chosen neither. The sun made her silver hair glow like a halo she'd stolen. She had long ago given up on the idea of sainthood and settled instead into a gentler calling, keeping peace among the peculiar souls who orbited the convent like wayward planets. And orbit they did. The toddler, no longer a toddler, but a whip-smart, wide-eyed 5-year-old, was known to everyone simply as Chaos. His name, given half in jest by Dorothea one feverish night, had stuck like gum to a hymn book. Chaos was a bright little comet in corduroy overalls, with an imagination that leaked into reality. When he laughed, things grew, weeds sprouted blossoms overnight, clocks lost 10 minutes, and once, the statue of St. Jude winked at a passing mailman. Everyone agreed he was special. No one agreed on why. Concepcion, it turned out, had never really died, only disappeared, as if swallowed by the in-between. Her reappearance a year ago had been as matter-of-fact as her exit. She walked through the front gate wearing a tourist visor and holding a 7-Eleven coffee. No one asked questions. No one wanted the answers. These days she worked part-time at the call center the convent operated out of an old gymnasium, running her headset empire like a benevolent dictator. She smelled faintly of cucumber melon lotion, vodka mints, and resurrection. Sean, the reformed skeptic and part-time hero, was alive too, though he didn't remember the details of the bone avalanche incident, as the insurance paperwork called it. He and Cora, who had legally changed her name to Cato for personal evolution reasons, were engaged now. Their wedding was 2 weeks away, to be held right there on convent grounds, though no one could agree which day the priest had actually booked. Cato had taken to wearing bright scarves and quoting Rumi out of context. She called herself a vessel of transitions, but Dorothea said she still snored like a Harley on idle. Sister Clotilde had returned to her managerial post at the convent's call center, headset in one hand and chamomile tea in the other, corralling the staff with passive-aggressive Bible verses. Her face, still beautiful in a sharp, haunted way, had softened only slightly since her public humiliation during the Great Habit debacle of Book 2. She and Sister Eugenia still refused to make eye contact during morning prayer, but their mutual loathing had mellowed into something almost sisterly, like 2 cats sharing the same sunbeam but pretending not to notice. The museum down the road still held the strange relic, the mirror stone under heavy glass and thicker denial. Professor Voss had taken permanent residence there, along with Loon and Merrick, Clotilde's precocious niece and nephew. Voss, ever the philosopher, was convinced the relic was alive, that it learned from those who stared too long. He'd started talking to it in Latin, and once in an unguarded moment, it had whispered back in Mandarin. Lune, the niece, spent most of her time drawing diagrams of impossible architecture. Merrick wrote code that sometimes worked and sometimes played Gregorian chants from nowhere. They were gifted. And deeply unsettling. Back at the convent, the supporting cast had thickened like Goodrue. Germain, Gumbo's grandson, handled maintenance. He'd inherited his grandfather's instincts, but none of his patience. The boy could fix a leak, exorcise a draft, and charm a wasp nest all in the same morning. He wore headphones that weren't plugged into anything, claiming they kept the ghosts from asking for rides. Mr. Pell, perpetually red-faced and polite, handled deliveries, plumbing, and occasionally breaking up theological brawls between Eugenia and Lionel. He also ran an underground poker night in the confessional once a month, but everyone pretended not to know. And yes, Father Lionel was still there, as was Sister Eugenia, both part of the convent's inner circle, who actually handled the spiritual side of the institution. They were the yin and yang of decorum. He believed in quiet reflection and mercy. She believed in volume and disinfectant. Above them both sat Mother Superior Philomena, who had recently emerged from sabbatical in Peru and immediately decided the entire convent needed a strategic rebranding. She was rumored to have met the Pope in a karaoke bar, but no one dared ask. Philomena's arrival had united the otherwise fragmented group, partly out of respect, mostly out of fear. She was the kind of woman who could silence a riot just by raising an eyebrow. As for the convent's inner workings, they had grown into something between a sanctuary, a call center, and a mild tourist attraction. The nuns handled online prayer requests, miracle packages came with complimentary bonsai trimmings, while volunteers like Dorothea and Cato tended the bonsai garden, which had become something of a local legend. The trees there seemed to grow in impossible patterns, spirals, knots, even fractal shapes that resembled faces. Gumbo said the garden hummed at night. Ralph the parrot swore he saw one of the trees yawn. And beneath it all, deep in the soil, were whispers of something older, the same power that once cracked the stone, that had pulled Concepcion through death and back again. Ane, the magical miniature horse, had become a kind of mascot for the convent. He could not speak, but his presence seemed to cancel out bad moods and hangovers. Whenever someone cried, he'd appear outside their window like an equine guardian angel with impeccable timing. Father Lionel swore that when he blessed the beast, his hands came away warm, as though he'd laid them on living light. As summer deepened into late August, the convent was both a cradle and a crossroads. Old wounds had scabbed over but not healed. The museum's relic pulsed faintly at night again, like a distant heartbeat. And chaos, little chaos, was about to start kindergarten. First day of school, Dorothea said one humid afternoon, looking at him over the top of her sunglasses. "You ready, baby?" Chaos nodded solemnly, as if he'd been preparing for this his entire short, enchanted life. The air shimmered. Somewhere far off, the parrot muttered, "Not done yet." And in the bonsai garden, a single leaf turned upside down and began to glow faintly blue. Book 3, Chapter 2, Popsicles and Prophecies. The morning started sticky, the kind of Gulf humidity that made even the air seem tired. Sister Dorothea was sitting at the chipped kitchen table in a faded pink robe and fuzzy slippers that looked like they'd survived 2 hurricanes and an exorcism. She was trying to butter toast while also keeping chaos from licking the cat. Across from her, Gumbo was chewing on the same piece of bacon for the 3rd time, reading the newspaper as if it might blink back at him. He'd been up since 5, polishing his false teeth and muttering to himself about energetic disturbances in the East Wing. "Gumbo," Dorothea said, in that tone she used when she didn't want to sound worried, but always did. "He's starting kindergarten today. You think the world's ready for that?" Gumbo snorted. World ain't never ready for anything worth happening. He tapped his temple with the butter knife. Besides, boy's special. You can't put that kind of magic in a lunchbox. Dorothea sighed. That's what worries me. In the cramped little bathroom, Kata leaned against the mirror, applying lipstick that matched her mood, defiant coral, and whispered to her reflection. Don't tell nobody today, all right? On the fogged-up mirror, faint words appeared in a child's handwriting. I know my mama and my mom. She gasped, then smiled despite herself. It was no secret among the close circle that Dorothea, despite her habit and her grace, was technically a genetic male, born Theodore, reborn a sister. And it was less secret, but more delicate, that Chaos had been carried by Cato, once as wild as a match in a hay barn, who had offered her body when Dorothea and Gumbo's longing for family outgrew their understanding of rules or reason. Love had made its own way. The rest of the world didn't need to know how. The trio, Dorothea, Gumbo, and Chaos, stood at the bus stop that morning like a Norman Rockwell painting left out in the rain. Dorothea had packed 2 sandwiches, 3 throw pillows for comfort, and a small porcelain bird for protection. Chaos held the bird gently, whispering secrets to it that made its eyes flicker with tiny sparks of light. The yellow school bus rumbled down the road, and Dorothea's chest tightened. She'd battled spirits, earthquakes, and even the occasional poltergeist, but nothing frightened her like watching that bus door open. The first incident. By 9:15 a.m., Chaos had made a friend, a quiet boy named Hunter who wore a pinafore over his shorts because it made him feel royal. Everything was fine until snack time, when Chaos reached for a popsicle and, in his excitement, caused every other popsicle in the classroom freezer to erupt like rainbow geysers. The ceiling dripped cherry, lime, and guilt. The teacher screamed, then apologized, then fainted into a tub of crayons. Chaos, sticky and proud, announced, I made a rainbow from the inside. The second incident. At recess, Chaos wandered toward the playground seesaw. He put one hand on it, just one, and the metal beam began to hum like a tuning fork. Before anyone could stop him, it lifted off the ground and spun in a slow, graceful circle above the children's heads like some Pentecostal halo. The principal called the police. The police called the fire department. The fire department called the local news. Dorothea, watching from her car outside, muttered a prayer that sounded suspiciously like a curse and ran inside, veil flapping. By the time she reached the playground, Chaos had made the seesaw land gently and was explaining to the other kids how gravity was just a suggestion. The third incident. After lunch, a suspicious pile of salsa and tater tots, Chaos was asked to draw a family portrait. He used a single piece of chalk and, within seconds, the image began to move. The teacher watched frozen as the drawing breathed. Dorothea and Gumbo appeared in living color on the board, Gumbo holding a cooler full of dead fish, Dorothea in a pink pinafore, smiling with one eye glowing gold. And behind them, in the chalk fog, was Concepcion, waving. The drawing whispered, he's opening doors again. Then the chalk broke in half. By the time school let out, rumors were already flying. Someone said the boy made ghosts appear. Someone else said he spoke to God. One kid swore he saw Chaos pull a small river raft out of thin air to save a paper boat. Dorothea picked him up in silence. Gumbo sat in the passenger seat, holding his false teeth in his hand like they might offer advice. Well, Dorothea said finally, we made it through day 1. Barely, Gumbo muttered. From the back seat, Chaos piped up. I didn't mean to make the popsicles explode, Nana. They wanted to be free. Dorothea rubbed her temples. Baby, sometimes things don't need freeing. They just need eaten. Back at the convent, Dorothea poured herself a glass of lemonade and stared out the window at the bonsai garden, where sunlight fell in little coins through the leaves. Gumbo was in the next room, talking to the TV again, an old rerun of Blossom, which he claimed gave him prophetic dreams. Kato called from the other end of the house. The suicide hotline called again, said our number's one digit off theirs. You want to tell them to stop giving us the sad folks? Dorothea didn't answer. She was watching chaos in the yard, playing with a piece of chalk again. He drew a circle on the garden wall, and for a moment, just a moment, she thought she saw movement inside it. Something shimmered. Something waiting. Then chaos turned, grinning. Look, Nana, a door. That night, after chaos was asleep, Dorothea found a note written in lipstick on her bathroom mirror. It read, "The child sees both sides. Keep him laughing." She wiped it off with a towel, but the faint outline remained. Outside, lightning flickered once over the horizon. And in the dark of the bonsai garden, one of the porcelain birds cracked not from age, but from something inside, trying to get out. Book 3, The Orchard Reborn. Chapter 2, Peppermint, Lithium, and the Lord's Little Secrets. Morning sunlight spilled like spilled cream across the cracked windows of the convent apartment Gumbo and Dorothea shared, that same wonky light that seemed to show the truth before the world had a chance to lie about it. Gumbo, now 81 but still stubbornly refusing to act his age, sat in his favorite vinyl recliner, wrangling with a box of oatmeal that had gone rogue and puffed open like it had opinions. They seal these damn things tighter than the Ark of the Covenant, he muttered, crumbs flying. Dorothea, 63, cool-headed, trim as a chalk line, and possessing a kind of androgynous elegance that could confuse both angels and DMV clerks, was kneeling by Chaos's tiny shoes. You're going to be the best-dressed kindergartner in the county, Sugarplum, she said, tying his laces tight enough to withstand a tornado or a tantrum. Her voice had a honeyed rasp, but behind her eyes, there was always that quiet storm, the secret she'd lived with so long that even her reflection looked tired of pretending. Everyone close to her knew by now that Dorothea had been born a man, but had lived most of her adult life in quiet, radiant rebellion against the box that biology tried to cram her into. What most didn't know was that Chaos had been carried to term by Cato, formerly known as Cora, self-proclaimed reincarnation of a Renaissance courtesan, and now happily planning her wedding to Sean in the bonsai garden. Dorothea and Gumbo were the child's parents, though the paperwork said otherwise. Love had been the alchemy, deception the cover, and the result was this little miracle with eyes the color of melted glass and an aura that seemed to hum like a radio between dimensions. Chaos's first day of kindergarten. The classroom was a swirl of crayon dust, spilled juice, and the faint, sticky smell of fruit punch and Elmer's glue. Chaos, in his little blue pinafore, which Dorothea insisted was gender-neutral avant-garde, sat on a tiny chair, swinging his feet and chewing a peppermint candy like it held the secrets of the cosmos. Mrs. Rigsby, a woman who looked like she'd been laminated in the 1980s and reissued annually, handed out popsicles for morning snack. That was when supernatural thing number 1 happened. Chaos, without touching a thing, made all the popsicles melt at once, every flavor, every color, like they were embarrassed to exist. Cherry, lime, grape, puddles of sticky regret. The kids cheered. Mrs. Rigsby screamed. Chaos smiled shyly, sugar dripping down his chin. They just got tired, he said. Then came supernatural thing number 2, the class hamster, a fat little bastard named Colonel Nibbles, suddenly began quoting The Wizard of Oz in perfect cadence, his tiny voice echoing through the vents. There's no place like home, there's no place like home. Mrs. Rigsby fainted. And supernatural thing number 3? The alphabet chart on the wall rearranged itself into a perfectly rhymed poem about death, rebirth, and salsa. Yes, salsa. It even ended with, when life dips you low, baby, spin back and glow. Add tomatoes, cilantro, and never let go. By the time Dorothea arrived to pick him up, the classroom was chaos incarnate, pun both intended and divine. She and Gumbo exchanged that look, the same one they'd shared when Chaos accidentally turned Germain's dentures into moth wings last summer. Second day, trouble brews. Dorothea almost didn't send him back. But Gumbo, ever the optimist, ever the fool, said, "The boys gotta learn how to be human, Even gods need recess." So off he went again. And that's when the ugliness showed up. Some older kids, mean little gremlins raised on too much corn syrup and not enough love, decided to tease Chaos. Called him names about his skin, his hair, his weird eyes. One of them threw a piece of chalk at him and said, "You're not like us." Chaos blinked, hurt spilling through him like water through silk. Then the sky outside turned a greenish bruise. The seesaw in the playground began to move on its own, creaking like an old ghost. The bullies' backpacks opened and out spilled, small porcelain birds, hundreds of them, fluttering around, pecking at the air like they were made of memory and menace. The birds chased the bullies into the parking lot, where one fell headfirst into the principal's river raft, used for science experiments, and another tripped over a cooler full of dead fish from the cafeteria's ill-fated biology day. Chaos just stood there, quiet and shining, like a storm that didn't want to hurt anyone. Home again. By the time Dorothea got the call, she was applying lipstick and scribbling, "We are all just waves," on the mirror in frustration. "They don't understand him," she muttered to Gumbo, who was playing backgammon with Father Lionel and eating oatmeal with his fingers. "They never understand prophets," Lionel said, popping a peppermint candy in his mouth. "Especially when they still need nap time." That was the moment Dorothea decided to homeschool Chaos, for everyone's sake. "The world's not ready," she sighed. Gumbo nodded, eyes glinting. "It never was." Meanwhile at the convent. While this domestic storm brewed, chaos of another flavor erupted behind the thick stone walls of the convent proper. Sister Eugenia and Sister Clotilde had been at each other's throats for weeks, the tension snapping louder than the faulty generator. It started with a disagreement about a shipment of ranch dressing for the convent's soup kitchen, and ended with a flying backgammon board and an overturned statue of Joan Crawford, donated during a charity auction by a deranged fan. Mother Superior tried to step in, her patience stretched thinner than a communion wafer. "Sisters, this is holy ground." Eugenia snarled, "Tell that to her. She's been stealing from the pantry." Clotilde screamed, "You can't prove the peanut butter incident." The brawl that followed would later be described by witnesses as somewhere between a Jerry Springer rerun and a spiritual exorcism. It took Father Lionel, 2 janitors, and 1 emu, don't ask how it got there, to break them up. Clotilde ended up in the hospital with minor injuries, but major vindication. Turns out, Eugenia had been skimming from the alms fund. The cliffhanger. Things seemed to be settling when Professor Voss received an email at the museum, one that made his blood go colder than the crypt beneath the chapel. It was from an untraceable account. Subject line, "Remember me?" Attached, a photo of a 1967 Stingray, parked outside the convent gates, and in the driver's seat, unmistakably, was Professor Brigsby, the disgraced academic who'd vanished years ago after his arrest for lewd conduct with theological implications. Voss immediately called Mother Superior. His voice trembled. "Lock the chapel. Keep the boy away from him. He's not here for redemption. He's here for chaos." Outside, lightning split the horizon like a warning. Inside, Gumbo reached for his old revolver, a relic from his youth, while Dorothea quietly took down the bow and arrow from above the mantel. Chaos sat cross-legged on the floor, humming to himself, small porcelain birds circling lazily around his head like halos. And somewhere in the shadows, the old Chinese man from Book 1 whispered, "The orchard bears strange fruit once more." Chapter 4. Lightning don't always strike twice, but it sure likes to hover. The rain had already passed, but the sky above the convent still looked bruised, like a black eye healing slow. The air smelled of ozone and old roses, the kind that refuse to die even when the bush has gone half to thorn. Somewhere a pipe rattled, the bones of the place whispering old gossip. Inside, light bulbs flickered like nervous lies. Sister Dorothea sat in the kitchen, her robe half undone, one slipper off, her false eyelashes hanging on the corner of the toaster. She'd been trying to make peppermint tea, but instead found herself staring at a bowl of oatmeal she didn't remember making. Gumbo was beside her, half asleep and still smelling faintly of Bengali and despair. The toddler, Chaos, had long since gone to bed, at least they thought he had. Then came the knock. 3 times, soft but deliberate. It was Cato, red-eyed, her lipstick smeared halfway across her cheek, like she'd kissed a ghost, and the ghost hadn't wanted it. Sean followed behind her, carrying a 6-pack and a bleeding heart, figuratively, though with this crowd, one never could be sure. Their arguments had been public all week. Word was he'd called her too much like her mama, and she'd slapped him with a throw pillow that had rhinestones spelling out "bless this mess." Now they were making up in that dangerous way, quiet, polite, careful, like 2 snakes pretending to cuddle. "You heard about Germaine?" Cato said, voice soft. Dorothea blinked. "No. What happened?" Sean rubbed his temple. "He fell through the maintenance attic. Busted his shoulder and maybe his pride. Mr. Pell's got him in the infirmary. Says he's delirious, talking about bones in the walls again." Dorothea's heart dropped like a coin down a well. "Lord, not again. We just had that place blessed." "By who?" Cato said, lighting a cigarette with trembling fingers. "Sister Eugenia? That woman couldn't bless a salt shaker." Outside, lightning cracked again, though the storm had supposedly passed. Ralph the parrot squawked from the hallway, "Dead fish in the cooler." Dead fish in the cooler, which was something he'd picked up from a failed river rafting trip last summer. Nobody laughed this time. They all froze as the convent bell, the old rusted one that hadn't rung in years, suddenly tolled once. Just once. Loud and heavy, like it meant it. Gumbo stood, his bad knee popping. "That ain't right. That ain't never right." Before anyone could speak, a scream tore through the corridor, high, brittle, unmistakably female. It came from the East Wing, the one nobody went into after dark. The one with the locked archive rooms and the broken statue of Saint Veronica missing her hands. By the time they got there, Father Lionel was already at the scene, flashlight trembling. "Lord preserve us," he whispered. Sister Clotilde was sprawled on the tile floor, blood running from a cut on her scalp. Over her stood Sister Eugenia, hair wild, habit torn, her hands still shaking. "She started it," Eugenia panted. She said I wasn't fit to wear the cloth. She said I was nothing but a laundress in a habit." "She called you a what?" Dorothea said. "A laundress in a habit," Eugenia barked, throwing her arms up, smacking Lionel in the face with a rosary. The scene descended into chaos. Clotilde was semi-conscious, muttering something about Mother Superior's secrets. Gumbo tried to help her up, but Ralph flew in screeching, "Call 911. Call 911, and someone did, though nobody knew if they actually got through. By the time the ambulance arrived, the convent looked like the aftermath of a failed backgammon tournament at a nursing home. Pill bottles, peppermints, and one overturned oatmeal bowl scattered across the floor. Clotilde was loaded onto the gurney. Her face, pale but oddly serene, turned toward Dorothea. "Don't let them touch the garden," she murmured. "The bonsai, the roots go deeper than they should." And then she was gone into the rain. The next day, the papers were full of it. Nuns brawl at local convent. One hospitalized, one questioned. The photo they used showed Sister Eugenia flipping off the camera as she was led to a police car. Mother Superior called an emergency meeting. "This place has become a mockery of devotion," she said, slamming a folder on the table. "Peppermint candies and broken vows. It's an abomination." Father Lionel tried to calm her. "Now, Mother, surely." "Surely nothing," she snapped. "We are sitting atop something unholy." I feel it every night in my bones. And right on cue, the floorboards creaked. Meanwhile, back at the museum, Professor Voss was nursing a headache and a cigarette that wasn't technically allowed indoors. Loon and Merrick hovered over a folder of old police reports. Each page bore the same name, Professor Brigsby. He's out, Merrick whispered. They let him out 2 weeks ago. Voss's hand trembled slightly. I know. He sent me a letter. Loon frowned. What did it say? Voss looked up, eyes hollow. Just one line. You still don't know who opened the door. They froze, staring at one another, and then the sound came, a thump against the museum glass. Something pressed against it from the outside, pale, indistinct, almost human. When they rushed to the window, nothing was there but a fogged handprint, with 7 fingers. Back at the convent, Gumbo found Cato sitting alone in the bonsai garden, staring at her reflection in the pond. You know, she said softly, Sean says he's thinking of calling off the wedding. That's so. Gumbo sat beside her, wheezing a little. Man's a fool. You don't let go of something like love just 'cause it's got teeth. She smiled faintly. He says I scare him sometimes. Well, Gumbo said, he's right to be scared. The world's full of people who ain't scary enough. They both laughed. Then a rustle, soft but real, came from the trees. A shape moved just beyond the hedge. Tall, slow, deliberate. Gumbo stood, heart thudding. Who's there? No answer. Just a low chuckle, and the glint of something metallic catching moonlight, a gun barrel, maybe. Or a mirror. Hard to tell. When he stepped closer, he found a note pinned to the scarecrow with a bow and arrow, an actual arrow, with an old-fashioned head. The paper was wet, smeared with what looked like lipstick, and written in shaky letters. Tell Voss the emu remembers. He turned, the wind whipping through the trees like the last breath of something long dead. And for just a second, just long enough to doubt himself, he thought he saw Concepcion in the window of the old chapel. Watching. Smiling. Fading. And somewhere across town, Professor Brigsby sat in the driver's seat of a faded 1967 Stingray parked outside a strip club. A peppermint candy rolled across the dash as he whispered into a tape recorder. They think it's over. But the orchard always grows back. The tape hissed, then clicked. Rain began again. And far off in the convent, the scarecrow turned its head. Chapter 6, When the Garden Grows Back. At first it was just a smell. Sweet, too sweet, like cucumber melon body spray spilled on compost. By Tuesday the smell had teeth. Sister Dorothea noticed it first when she took Chaos to feed the koi. The bonsai garden shimmered as though the air above it were hot, though the morning was cool enough to see her breath. The miniature trees, each centuries old and pruned within an inch of their souls, had started to lean inward, their branches weaving themselves into a tight circle. Something was pushing up through the gravel in the middle. Something the color of wet bronze. Best not tell Mother Superior till we know what it is, Gumbo muttered, poking it with a broom handle. It gave a sigh, and the gravel pulsed once, like a heartbeat. He dropped the broom. Well, that ain't horticulture. By evening, word had seeped through the convent like cheap wine through linen. The call center girls, their headsets glowing in the dark dormitory, whispered between customer complaints. Something's growing out there, said one. Sister Clotilde said it hums hymns after midnight. Eugenia heard the gossip and, against every habit of pride, sought Clotilde out. She found her kneeling by the pond, the mystery gleaming at the garden center like a coin from heaven or hell. I came to pray, Eugenia lied. Then pray with your eyes open, Clotilde said. Providence don't hide, it sprouts. They stayed there till dawn, and by dawn an alliance had budded between them, uneasy, secret, necessary. Clotilde believed the growth was divine. Eugenia wasn't so sure, but the warmth she felt standing beside her rival made her willing to pretend. 3 days later the convent awoke to pandemonium. Tales. Actual tails, thin, furry, twitching things on nearly a dozen nuns, 2 janitors, and 1 telemarketer named Denise who swore hers could pick up a phone. The panic was biblical. Mother Superior fainted. Father Lionel tried an exorcism via Zoom that crashed halfway through. Clotilde, radiant with faith, declared, "The Lord is marking his chosen." "Then why mine got stripes?" Gumbo hollered. Chaos giggled until his own back itched. Dorothea checked him head to toe. No tail, yet, but his eyes had gone oddly golden. She said nothing. Miles away, inside the museum, Professor Voss, Loon, and Merrick were cataloging the recovered artifacts from Egypt, the mirror stone among them, when the power cut out. Emergency lights bled red down the hallways. "Generator?" Merrick asked. Before Voss could answer, a silhouette stepped from the storage room. Professor Brigsby. Same tweed jacket, same reptile smile. "Well," he said, "I was wondering when you'd uncover my little secret." In seconds, he had a pistol out, not aimed to kill, just to hurt. "You're coming with me. All of you. There's something you need to see." They tried to argue. He pressed the barrel to the glass case of the antelope head. "Move, or this old friend starts talking again." They moved. Back at the convent, the mirror stone pulsed. Dorothea, Gumbo, and Clotilde gathered in the vestry, curtains drawn. The tails on their companions twitched behind closed doors. The 3 of them held hands, chanting the words carved around the stone's edge. At first nothing. Then static in the air, like a television between channels. A shape flickered inside the stone's smoky depths, no arms, no legs, just a familiar dopey grin. "Scott?" Dorothea whispered. "You still out there?" His voice came through like wind under a door. "Don't dig too deep, the roots remember what the fruit forgets." The image warped. For a heartbeat the reflection was not Scott at all, but the antelope head from the museum, eyes blazing cobalt. "He's bringing the mirror home," it said. "He wants the garden to open." Then darkness swallowed the light, leaving only the faint scent of ozone and peppermint. At that same instant, Brigsby's stolen car screeched into the driveway of a sagging house in an unmarked suburb. He dragged Voss, Loon, and Merrick inside. Maps papered the walls, all traced with circles leading back to the convent. "You brought it here," Brigsby hissed. "The seed. You think it just grew?" Loon spat. "What are you talking about?" He smiled, eyes reflecting a strange bronze glow. "Every orchard starts with one buried sin." From the cellar came a hum low, living, hungry. At the convent, the bronze growth in the bonsai circle split open like a flower. Inside shimmered a mirror-smooth surface, rippling with faces none of them recognized. Clotilde fell to her knees. "Behold, the garden answers." Eugenia crossed herself. "Sister, that garden just blinked." The air quivered. Somewhere distant, perhaps in Brigsby's cellar, perhaps beneath their feet, something enormous inhaled. And all across the convent, every new tale flicked in perfect unison. Chapter 6: The Garden That Grew Teeth. Professor Brigsby had been watching for weeks. From the crawlspace above the museum archives, his milky eyes glowed faintly whenever the fluorescent lights hummed low enough. He smelled of mothballs and bad theology. When the power cut one Wednesday afternoon, right in the middle of Dr. Voss's lecture on the symbolic use of teeth in late Byzantine reliquaries, Brigsby struck. He stepped from the shadows, gun trembling in one hand, a cracked plastic rosary in the other. "Field trip," he whispered, "to the house where all beginnings end." Merrick laughed first, because Merrick always laughed when terrified. Lund muttered something about insurance coverage. And Voss, ever the pragmatist, raised her clipboard like a shield and said, "Professor, you've been dead for 3 years." "Dead," Brigsby hissed, "is a social construct." They didn't have much choice. He herded them out the back loading dock and into a stolen 1967 Stingray that looked like it had been resurrected from a swamp. The glove box was packed with prescription bottles labeled lithium, Dr. B. Brigsby. The dashboard crucifix had a tiny crack running down Jesus' sternum, and when the car hit a bump, the little Christ rattled like a broken tambourine. The drive blurred into a fevered dream of chain restaurants and forgotten neighborhoods. They ended up at a decaying ranch house surrounded by, of all things, hundreds of ceramic emus, each hand-painted with the same vacant blue stare. Inside smelled of fried chicken, ammonia, and candle wax. On the wall, a faded photo of President Reagan hung crookedly beside a page ripped from Playgirl, annotated in red ink. Power is symmetry inverted. Someone, presumably Brigsby, had drawn flat-iron nipples over Reagan's chest, perfect inverted pyramids of authority. Meanwhile, back at the convent, nobody could quite tell whether Concepcion was alive or dead. She'd been lying in the infirmary for 2 days, breathing one moment and perfectly still the next. Her skin glowed faintly in candlelight, like a glass of milk under the moon. Some swore they heard her humming Ave Maria backwards. Dorothea refused to sign the death certificate. Gumbo kept pacing with a bucket of ice water, insisting he'd seen worse in Guatemala. The Mother Superior declared it an ambiguous miracle and ordered the chapel closed for fumigation. Outside, in the bonsai garden, something unholy or holy, depending on your perspective, was growing. Germain noticed first. He'd gone out to smoke and talk smack about the call center's new suicide hotline clients when the ground beneath the smallest bonsai began to pulse like a heartbeat. Mr. Pill, who was trimming a miniature elm, saw the soil move and said, "That ain't roots, bro. That's respiration." Then the old Chinese gardener, whose name no one remembered, began chanting in a dialect no one could identify. The earth split open like a zipper, and what came out looked like coral, bone, and angel feathers fused together. For a moment, everyone froze. The air filled with the smell of rainbows and pennies. Then a high-pitched keening echoed through the trees. By sunset, Germain's left hand had sprouted a vestigial tail, small, gray, and twitching like it had its own agenda. Mr. Pill's grew overnight, longer, tufted, prehensile. Within 3 days, half the convent staff were walking funny, hiding tails under their robes or skirts. Sister Clotilde declared it divine providence. Sister Eugenia called it genetic retribution. And Mother Superior just kept muttering, "We're not insured for this." While panic spread across the convent, Dorothea and Gumbo retreated to the mirror stone chamber. They knelt before the cracked obsidian slab, whispering the ancient words. The surface rippled, and at last the armless, legless face of Scott appeared, his grin lopsided, his eyes bottomless. "The garden has teeth," Scott murmured. "Feed it mercy, or it will feed itself." Then the mirror went dark, replaced by the reflection of the antelope head mounted in the museum, thousands of miles away. Its glass eyes rolled, and in a voice like wind through bone it whispered, "Brigsby's house is not a house. It's a wound that remembers." Back in the lair, Voss, Merrick, and Lund stood in Brigsby's basement. The walls were papered with pages from Better Homes and Gardens and old catechisms. A seesaw balanced in the center, one end weighed down by a bucket of oatmeal, the other by a small porcelain bird. Brigsby handed Merrick a piece of chalk. "Draw the door," he said. "It's the only way out." "What door?" Merrick stammered. "The one that leads to forgiveness," Brigsby replied, applying lipstick to a mirror. In scrawled crimson, he wrote, "Jesus on the cross / wasn't the only one nailed for love." The reflection shuddered. Somewhere distant, the bonsai garden's roots groaned. And from the convent bell tower, Sister Eugenia screamed, a sound that rippled straight into the marrow of every living thing for miles. The emus outside began to sing, faintly, in unison, and the world leaned just slightly to the left. The bonsai garden's growth turns from a curiosity into a phenomenon. I'll finally describe what it looks like and how it's warping everything around it. The tail situation gets worse before the toddler intervenes in a strange, cosmic sweet way tied to the magic painting. Sister Clotilde and Sister Eugenia form a tense frenemy, alliance that teeters between devotion and sabotage. Concepcion's ghostly flickers keep haunting the corners, glimpses in mirrors, in fog, in candlelight. Meanwhile, Voss, Loon, and Merrick are still trapped in Brigsby's lair. The escape plays out with eerie violence. One of them is shot but lives. Cato's maltshop monologue runs through her whole messy, beautiful past and lands on a decisive choice about Sean. We close on a haunting image that ties the bonsai garden, the magic painting, and Concepcion's spectral energy together. Book 3, Chapter 7. The Garden That Dreamed in Color. The bonsai garden had started whispering at night. Not in words exactly, more in the language of petals opening, roots splitting, bark stretching like skin. Something pale and luminous was pushing its way out of the moss beds. At first it looked like fungus, then like coral, then like bone. Within days, the whole plot pulsed faintly, as if drawing breath. By the third morning, everyone on the convent grounds had a tale. Short, soft, animal cute at first, then oddly articulate, twitching to moods and whispers. The call center girls wore long coats and said nothing, but phones kept slipping off desks as tales flicked with embarrassment. Sister Eugenia insisted it was divine proof of original sin. Sister Clotilde countered that it was a reward, a return to the Edenic state. They fought, naturally, then prayed together, then fought again. And somewhere between the prayers and the shouting, they began an uneasy alliance, a secret project to study the garden. Clotilde brought holy water. Eugenia brought tequila. Both worked. Meanwhile, in a locked basement halfway across town, Professor Brigsby's lair smelled of turpentine and wet plaster. He had bound Professor Voss, Loon, and Merrick to old museum display racks, muttering about bringing the ancient image back to life. The shadows on his walls moved too slowly, as if filmed through syrup. When Voss tried to reason with him, Brigsby just smiled, teeth too white for his age, and lifted a small pistol, its barrel wrapped in duct tape. Art must suffer, he said, and fired. The bullet caught Merrick in the shoulder. A pink mist, a scream, and then chaos. Shelves toppled, jars shattered, and the smell of old resin filled the air. Loon grabbed a shard of glass, cut her bonds, and they stumbled into the alley, while Brigsby laughed somewhere behind them. Back at the convent, Germain, Mr. Pell, and the old Chinese man were in the bonsai garden, poking at the glowing growth. "It's humming," Germain said. "Not humming," the old man corrected. "Praying." Then the air rippled, a shimmer of fried chicken scent, ozone, and something like Guatemala after rain. Germain dropped to his knees. A pale mist rose, forming a shape, Concepcion. For an instant she looked solid, her eyes wide with warning. "Not yet," she whispered, and vanished. That same afternoon, at a retro malt shop on the edge of town, Cato sat in a pink booth with a melted strawberry shake and a lipstick-stained straw. Rainbows from the jukebox lights streaked her pinafore. She stared at her reflection in the chrome napkin holder and talked softly to herself. She remembered Sparky, that wild, laughing friend from Book 1 who'd vanished in a motel fire. She remembered her dancer days, spinning under black lights and cigarette haze. She remembered the night she agreed to carry Gumbo's child for Dorothea, because love has its own logic, and because nobody else would understand. And now she had Sean's sweet, nervous Sean, ready to marry her, ring already bought, but something in her gut said the story wasn't done. "I'm done being somebody's symbol," she said aloud. "Time to be the damn author." Then she smiled, finished her shake, and walked out into the neon dusk. Back at the convent, the toddler, Chaos, toddled barefoot into the garden as thunder rolled overhead. The plants bent toward him. His eyes lit like tiny suns. He reached out to the largest bloom, a pulsing orb of flesh and crystal, and pressed his hand against it. The tails vanished from everyone within a mile radius. The orb cracked open, revealing paint. Thick, glimmering paint, flowing up invisible air like smoke. It drifted toward the convent wall and melted into the old magic painting of the storm. For a heartbeat, everyone saw Concepcion inside it, trapped behind the canvas, her face serene, her hand raised in quiet blessing. Far away, in an unknown place, someone watched the painting through a cracked surveillance monitor, just the edge of a mouth visible, smiling faintly. The screen flickered, the image froze, and the whisper from the bonsai garden returned, soft, childlike, impossible. She's not gone. She's just dreaming. And outside, the old Chinese man turned toward the sky and said, almost cheerfully, President Reagan never saw this coming. Thunder cracked. The smell of flat irons and peppermint filled the air. Chapter 8. The Watcher Beyond the Frame. Night came down strange over the convent, heavy, metallic, and full of static, like the sky was a live wire waiting for someone to touch it. The bonsai garden was quiet now, no longer breathing, no longer glowing. Chaos's intervention had sealed it, for now. But something had been released. Something old. Something that remembered. Concepcion's image still shimmered in the painting in the convent hall, though no one dared approach it after what they'd seen. People walked by quickly, eyes forward, hands tucked. But everyone thought they felt her presence. Just at the edge of a sigh. Or the corner of a room. Or behind them in an empty hall. Dorothea said it was comfort. Sister Eugenia said it was temptation. Clotilde said she was just fine with it, actually, in that tone that meant she was absolutely not fine and about to do something bold and foolish. Meanwhile, Voss, Merrick, bandaged but alive, and Loon were home from Brigsby's lair, but trembling in the corners of rooms like startled cats. Gumbo hadn't slept in 3 days, claiming the old Chinese man had told him, the vines ain't done singing. And Cato kept pacing past the convent painting, whispering, if you're in there, tell me what I'm supposed to do. But this chapter doesn't begin in the convent. It begins far away, in a room filled with screens. A basement full of thrift store monitors stacked on milk crates. Old VCRs. Police scanners. Static hum. Everything glowing a sick blue like a hospital hallway at 3 a.m. On the central monitor, the convent garden flickered in grainy, security camera footage. A hand moved across the screen frame. 2 fingers missing. The wrist tattooed with a crude crescent moon. A voice said softly, almost lovingly, "Oh, my sweet disasters, you're almost ready." And we finally see him. Mr. Willoughby. From Book 1. The hospice caretaker who talked to the dying. The one who claimed to hear angels scratching behind the wall. The one who vanished after the seance table caught fire. Yeah. He didn't die. He didn't leave. He just stepped sideways. Into whatever was watching them. He leans toward the screen now. Everything we began with Concepcion, everything that orchard was meant to be. The orchard was never reborn. It was planted. Meanwhile, back at the convent. Clotilde and Sister Eugenia were in the hallway arguing in whispers, the way women argue when both are determined to win, but neither wants to look like the aggressor. It is a sign, Clotilde insisted, tail twitching though it had already vanished. The garden awakened us to our original forms. It was biospiritual contamination, Sister Eugenia snapped, tightening her veil like a woman preparing for war. You're lucky nobody from the archdiocese found out. We'd be under investigation until Easter. You mean they would be under investigation, Clotilde corrected brightly. The convent isn't yours. It belongs to the orchard. Sister Eugenia froze. What orchard? Clotilde smiled the dangerous, sugar-sweet smile of a woman who has waited 17 chapters to drop this bomb. You really think the orchard was about trees? Silence. And then footsteps. Slow, heavy, familiar. Sister Supreme returned. She stepped into the hall like a storm in human shape. 6 feet tall. Veil jet black, not white. Rosary beads the size of small walnuts. The walk of a woman who has kicked someone through a stained glass window before and would not hesitate to do so again. Everyone stopped breathing. Even the painting flickered. Sister Supreme spoke, voice calm as a guillotine being lowered. The orchard was a covenant. And the covenant is awakening. Prepare yourselves. Someone is returning. But she didn't mean Concepcion. The candle beside the painting snapped to blue flame. A cold wind moved through the hall though no doors were open. A voice, soft, distant, layered, whispered. He has found the gate. Cut to Brigsby. Still alive. Still out there. Still bleeding, still laughing. But not alone. Someone steps into the alley where he hides. We don't see their face. Just their tail. A tail that didn't go away when chaos ended the spell. Brigsby looks up and smiles, lips stained with dried blood. I've been waiting for you. Back at the convent, the painting flickers again. Concepcion is visible for just a heartbeat, hand pressed to the inside of the canvas like glass. And behind her, another figure forming. Larger, wider, shadowed, watching. The toddler, Chaos, looks up at the painting and says the first full sentence of his life. He's coming. Chapter 9. The orchard was never just trees. The orchard had always been there, not physically, not all the time, not in any sensible way that a government map or a church registry or Sister Eugenia's exhaustive binders full of laminated procedures could confirm, but it had been there. It lived in memory and dream and blood and bone. Sometimes it was a grove. Sometimes a garden. Sometimes a painting. Sometimes a grave. But it had always been growing. And now, after everything, the timelines, the desert crossing, the painting, the brief resurrection, the vines, the tales, the whispers, it was awake. No one understood that better than Chaos, who was 5 and small and gentle and somehow older than every single adult who kept trying to protect him. Scene 1. Kindergarten fallout and new rules. Dorothea had taken Chaos out of public school after the second day, when he made every crayon in the classroom stand up and begin singing in 4-part harmony like a 1950s barbershop quartet. The teacher fainted. 2 students vomited. The principal asked if anyone in the family practiced home sorcery or amateur druidry. So now he was home, which meant that Gumbo and Dorothea were once again learning phonics and number blocks right alongside him. Gumbo insisted they start every morning with prayer, breakfast, and a lecture on the evils of Ronald Reagan, which Chaos absorbed like scripture. Dorothea sat cross-legged on the floor in pajama pants and eyeliner, saying gently, "Honey, today we use our inside gifts. Not the singing crayons gifts. Not the tornado in the living room gifts. Just normal human little boy gifts." Chaos nodded, solemn, understanding, but everyone knew there was no such thing as just normal with him. And honestly, they were running out of crayons. Scene 2. The convent and the new tension. Mother Superior had come out of retirement like a judge who smells chaos in the courthouse and refuses to trust the interns to handle procedure. She was old in the way that mountains are old, unmoving, observing, rumbling when necessary. Sister Eugenia was her right hand, order, obedience, and mild caffeine shakes. Sister Clotilde was her left, glitter, drama, fistfights behind the rectory, and unhinged faith in signs from beyond. They were frenemies now, bonded by the secret of the thing that had grown in the bonsai garden, the tales that had sprouted, and the whispers at night. What grew there had looked like a tree made of veins, pulsing softly like a heartbeat under leaves that smelled like incense and thunderstorms. When chaos touched it, it crumbled into luminous powder and vanished, but it had already changed everyone. Some tails were gone now. But some hadn't been tails. Some had been roots. No one wanted to talk about that part. Except Clotilde, who always wanted to talk about everything she wasn't supposed to talk about. Scene 3. The Museum Hostage Aftermath. Loon and Merrick had stopped shaking enough to return to work, though they kept all the lights on and refused to go into the lower level where the taxidermized antelope head hung, because they swore its eyes moved now. Professor Voss, ever the rationalist, said trauma played tricks on perception. Then the antelope head whispered, "He's coming." And Voss needed to sit down. They had not told anyone the worst part of Brigsby's lair. He had blueprints for the convent. And copies of old orchard glyphs. And pages of notes in a looping, ecstatic hand. Concepcion didn't die. She ascended. The child is the key. The orchard will reopen when the roots meet the sky. Voss burned the notes in a motel sink and did not sleep for 3 days. Scene 4. The Return of Sister Supreme. Sister Supreme was now living on the convent grounds in an unused bell tower apartment, where she practiced kickboxing, rosary meditation, and something she simply called spiritual reinforcement through controlled violence. She had taken chaos under her wing. Dorothea didn't approve. Gumbo approved very much. Chaos adored her. When she walked, Concepcion's name flickered in the painting. And someone else did too. A shape forming behind her. Larger. Shadowed. Not human. Scene 5, and now, Mr. Willoughby. The convent lights flickered. The hall air went cold. Someone knocked gently at the front gate. Germaine answered it because everyone else was busy pretending not to feel dread. The man outside looked harmless. Old beige cardigan. Soft, watery eyes. Hospital shoes. He smiled like a librarian telling a child to use an indoor voice. "Hello. I'm Mr. Willoughby. I used to work with the dying. I think we've met before. You were all just younger then." Dorothea stepped forward. Her breath caught. The memory hit her like a slap. The hospice. The orchard. The night the seance table caught fire. The laughter that wasn't laughter. Concepcion pulling her hand away too late. Mr. Willoughby bowed his head. "I'm here because the orchard has roots in both worlds. And the worlds are touching again. And once they touch fully, nothing will stay where it belongs." Chaos stepped out from behind Gumbo. Mr. Willoughby smiled at him in recognition. Not reverence. Not fear. Recognition. "Hello, little one." Chaos's voice was soft, almost musical. "You're the gardener." And Mr. Willoughby nodded. Scene 6. Who is watching? It was not Willoughby who was the watcher. It was Concepcion. Or the part of her that remained. Caught. In the orchard. Between timelines. Between lives. Sometimes she was alive. Sometimes dead. Sometimes in the desert. Sometimes in the painting. Sometimes standing behind someone in a hallway just long enough for them to blink and doubt themselves. She was the one Brigsby wanted. She was the one the orchard remembered. She was the root. And when chaos touched the painting again, Concepcion looked back. Not trapped. Not suffering. Waiting. Scene 7. Cliffhanger. The ground trembled. The bonsai garden began to hum again. The antelope head in the museum screamed. Sister Supreme whispered. Just before the lights went out. "He's already here." Chapter 9. The garden that remembered names. Nobody slept well at the convent anymore. You could blame the sounds, soft rustling after midnight, like silk dragging across the floorboards, but truthfully, it was the garden. The bonsai garden had always been Sister Eugenia's domain, a quiet corner where she whispered psalms to leaf and root like they were old friends. But now, something was growing in the center plot. Something that hadn't been planted. And no one could say what it was without their voice catching in their throat. It looked like a tree that remembered it had once been lightning. The trunk shimmered in faint pulses, like veins lit under skin. Each leaf was both green and gold and something deeper colors that didn't quite exist yet. And by the third day, the convent was full of whispers. People are growing tails. Germaine was the first. A soft, velvety tail, like a fox or lynx, though Germaine insisted, loudly, that it was just my spine figuring its business out. Mr. Pill developed something more reptilian, glossy and black, with an attitude problem. The old Chinese man working at the call center only bowed once at his reflection and said, again. By the fourth morning, even Gumbo found a small tufted tail sprouting beneath the waistband of his two large corduroys, and Dorothea nearly fainted into the laundry basket. Sister Clotilde smelled prophecy. Sister Eugenia smelled danger. And yet, they found themselves meeting in the garden at dawn, side by side, like two suspicious cats learning not to hiss for once. The Brigsby situation. Meanwhile, Professor Brigsby still had Lund, Voss, and Merrick detained in his unsettling Victorian house, cluttered with dusty bird cages and mannequins missing limbs like they had tried to walk away and failed. The air tasted like old incense and wet plaster. Brigsby paced with the elegance of a dying poet, muttering about the inversion of sanctity and the return of the Watcher. He would not explain. He would not touch them. But something about him felt like he had swallowed a secret too big for his body. And yes, someone was watching him too. From far away. Old as memory. Patient as stone. But we'll get back to that. Cato at the malt shop. Cato sat in the corner booth of Starlight Malt and Grill, elbows on Formica, stirring a milkshake she hadn't tasted. Afternoon sun hazed the windows in honey-soft rays. Her monologue wasn't spoken aloud, it lived in the space between every heartbeat. I had Sparky, she thought. And I had music. I had a stage and a spotlight and a name that sounded too pretty to belong to me. And I gave it up because something in me kept trying to crawl out of my own skin. She remembered performing at revivals, bright stage lights, swaying crowds, the heat of lifting her voice up high like offering a bird to God. She remembered being a topless dancer later, another stage, different light, different eyes watching, and yet it felt the same. They wanted to be saved. And I wanted to be seen. She remembered giving birth to the baby for Gumbo and Dorothea, her best act of love, her strangest offering, her truest fire. Now Sean wanted to get married. He had kind eyes. Good heart. He meant well. But love wasn't always enough to anchor a life. She thought about slipping back into Christian recording. There was interest again. A label sniffing. A producer texting. A touring church in Oklahoma wanting to feature her testimony. But she remembered what the spotlight did. And what it took. Cato lifted her milkshake and finally drank. No, she whispered. I'm going to do something that doesn't eat me alive this time. And with that decision, her tail, which had begun to sprout, stopped growing. Like her body approved. Concepcion, flickering. Everyone was afraid to mention it out loud anymore, but sometimes, just beside the window of the laundry hall, or reflected faintly in the glass of the chapel door, they saw her. Concepcion. Alive. Dead. Both. Neither. A mist-shaped memory. A flicker between worlds. Once, Sister Clotilde saw her clearly enough to speak. Are you lost? Concepcion only touched her own cheek, as if surprised to find it still there, and vanished. The garden event. Germaine, Mr. Pill, and the old Chinese man went into the garden at dusk. The tree pulsed again, lightning in slow motion, deep gold heat rising. All three felt something ancient and familiar brushing through them. They did not speak of it afterward. They did not have to. Their tales became symbols instead of mutations, reminders of evolution unfinished. The one watching. Yes. Mr. Willoughby returns. He was the old tax assessor with the plum-colored mustache from Book 1, the one who knew too much about the antelope head in the museum basement, but always said it wasn't time yet. He watches from a distance. He watches Brigsby. He watches the garden. He watches younger worlds trying to hatch out of older skins. His presence means only one thing. The past is about to remember itself. Sister Supreme enters. She arrives at twilight, swinging the convent gate open with the same casual grace one might use to open a screen door to a porch. Black habit, sunglasses, chewing spearmint like she's late for a jazz set. "All right," Sister Supreme says, surveying the garden, the shimmering tree, the tales, the tension. "Which one of you idiots opened a dimensional inheritance?" Sister Clotilde points at Eugenia. Eugenia points at Clotilde. They hold the moment. Then both burst out laughing. Not friendly. Not cruel. Just finally, damn it, human. Their alliance begins. End beat. Back at Brigsby's house. A window breaks. A struggle. A gun goes off. Not fatal. But blood touches the floorboards. And far away, in the museum, the antelope head opens its eyes. Chapter 10. The house that hummed when no one spoke. The gunshot didn't echo. It simply settled. Like dust. Like memory. Merrick was the one shot right in the shoulder, and Lund caught him before he hit the hardwood. Voss's glasses slipped down his nose, fogged with panic. Brigsby stood there with the revolver lowered, shaking, not with guilt, not with power, but with something like recognition. "You don't understand what's waking," he whispered. The house around them creaked, no breathed. Old wallpaper fluttered like lungs filling. Floorboards expanded and shivered. A low, vibrating hum filled the walls. Brigsby dropped the gun. It clattered. He stepped backward like he was the one afraid. "It hurt us," he hissed. From the attic, something shifted. Back at the convent. The garden's strange shimmering tree now towered 12 feet high, though no one had seen it grow. It simply was taller every morning. Sister Supreme had taken charge, though she didn't bark orders. She made reality itself seem slightly embarrassed to disobey her. Sister Eugenia and Sister Clotilde, now bonded by shared bewilderment and startling mutual respect, inspected the tail situation. Half the nuns had them now. Some soft and furry. Some long and reptilian. Some curled like question marks, the body wondering what question it had begun to ask. Clotilde stood arms crossed, tail flicking irritably behind her like a lioness checking for threats. "This is divine," Clotilde declared. "This is biological mutiny," Eugenia countered. Potato, Sister Supreme added, sucking on a peppermint she'd lifted from the chapel bowl. And then, a flash in the garden's mist. Concepcion. Or the idea of her. Or the memory of a version of her that had not yet decided whether it lived. She looked at them all. Eyes soft. Kind. Tired. "Don't choose sides," she said. And then she was gone. Eugenia and Clotilde looked at each other, not as rivals now, but as keepers of a mystery bigger than doctrine could handle. Meanwhile, Cato's decision becomes action. Word spread through the convent and call center like incense smoke. Cato wasn't going back to Christian music. Nobody judged. Nobody cheered. But they felt it, the way a shift in the wind tells birds when to migrate. She now spent mornings helping Dorothea with the baby and afternoons in the old chapel annex, where the acoustics were perfect. Not to perform. Not to convert. Just to sing. For the first time, her voice was free from audience and expectation. And there was beauty in that. A quiet, steady kind. The bonsai garden event. Germaine returned to the garden with Mr. Pill and the old Chinese man, as if drawn by instinct more than choice. The tree pulsed again, the color of sunrise, lightning, and unspoken childhood memories. Germaine's tail twitched, but then it began to retract. Like the tree was saying, "You no longer need this." Mr. Pill's tail flattened, then disappeared entirely. The old Chinese man only nodded as if he had expected it all along. "Corrective growth is rarely permanent," he said. The convent exhaled. Back to Brigsby's house. The attic door creaked open. No one touched it. The humming stopped. Silence thickened. Voss, trembling, stepped forward, not because he was brave, but because someone had to. In the attic sat a single object. A painting. The magic painting. The one that had traveled through books, time, basements, and what we might as well call alternate egg-shaped worlds. The figures inside it were moving now. Slowly. Deliberately. The antelope-headed figure lifted a hand and pointed. Not at Brigsby. Not at Voss. Not at the others. It pointed out of the painting. At them. Because someone was behind them. They turned. Mr. Willoughby stood in the doorway. Plum-colored mustache. Hat in hand. Expression unreadable as always. "Children," he said softly, "you've gone and opened the wrong door." Brigsby's knees buckled. You told me to stop it, you told me." Mr. Willoughby didn't respond with cruelty or authority. He responded with grief. "I told you to let her rest." The house dimmed. The humming returned, louder now, like a choir of things that had never needed mouths. The escape. Lund grabbed Merrick. Voss grabbed the revolver. Mr. Willoughby didn't stop them. Instead, he opened a side door none of them had noticed before. "Go, before she finishes waking." They didn't argue. They ran. Out into the night. Into unknown streets. Into a world growing stranger by the hour. Final beat. The shimmering garden tree flickered. The antelope in the painting followed their souls with its glass-painted eyes. Concepcion appeared one more time, just behind the chapel, crying without sound. And above everything. Watching. Waiting. The being Brigsby feared stirred fully awake. The chapter closes on one sentence. Something old has remembered its name. Chapter 11. The day the sky tilted 30 degrees to the left and pretended nothing happened. Morning broke strange. Not dramatic strange, just slightly wrong. Like someone had taken the sky and rotated it imperceptibly, so roofs, windows, and treetops now sat at an angle that didn't match memory. The convent noticed first, because convents always notice the subtle violations of reality. Faith trains the eye to catch the wobble beneath the ordinary. Sister Supreme stepped outside, hands wrapped in her shawl, eyes narrow. Something crossed over, she murmured. Eugenia and Clotilde exchanged a look, their new secret alliance a quiet current between them. They didn't tell Sister Supreme about the tree's latest bloom, or the way the air tasted like mint and lightning when you stood beneath it. They especially didn't mention that the tails were beginning to leave faint glowing impressions on stone surfaces, like the body was briefly existing in two places at once. Meanwhile, the ones who escaped the house. Voss, Merrick, arm in a sling, and Lund did not go home. They didn't even consciously decide where to go. Their feet took them to the only place that had ever felt like a fixed point. The museum. The building welcomed them like a cathedral built by accident. Dim, echoing. Its own heartbeat audible if you stood still enough. And there, Waiting at the base of the north stairwell was Mr. Willoughby. He hadn't followed them. He had arrived. Calm. Neat. Buttoned like a man who had been dressed by memory itself. "You three have been threaded into something older than chronology," he said. "Spare us the poetry," Voss snapped. "What woke up?" Mr. Willoughby's eyes softened. "Concepcion." Merrick stopped breathing. Lund's face folded inward like origami collapsing. Voss shook his head. No. No. She's dead." "Yes, in several timelines," Mr. Willoughby agreed, almost kindly. "But grief and identity do not obey death. The shape of her soul has not finished forming." He gestured to the wall where the magic painting now hung, though none of them had brought it. The antelope-headed figure was gone. The desert behind it shifted. Wind moving where there was no wind. Something was coming. The convent grounds, same moment. Chaos, formerly the toddler, now full of radiant, thoughtful 5-year-old gravity, stood under the shimmering tree. His small hand rested on the bark. His tail, already long gone, did not return. Instead, the tree reacted to him like a tuning fork struck by God. It sang. Not loudly. Not musically. But like the memory of a lullaby sung by someone who used to hold you while you slept. Germaine and Mr. Pill froze where they stood. The old Chinese man didn't freeze. He bowed. "The bridge chooses the carrier," he whispered. Gumbo, watching from the porch, swallowed hard. His own magic, the quiet, clumsy, earnest kind, flickered behind his eyes. He felt it. Concepcion was near. Not alive. Not dead. Not ghost. Not hallucination. Convergence. Cato's moment of decision. Cato sat in the malt shop with a notebook open, though she wasn't writing. She traced circles and condensation on her glass. Her mind replayed. Being 19, barefoot, body glittered in stage lights. Sparky laughing in a parking lot at 2 a.m., cigarette between teeth. Praying in a church bathroom while the sound system played God of Wonders ironically out of tune. Carrying chaos, crying into Gumbo's shoulder because love sometimes hurts in ways that aren't sad. Sean asking her to marry him in the museum atrium because the acoustics made it feel real. She whispered, "I don't want to be a symbol anymore. I just want to be." Outside, the sky bent another fraction of a degree. She didn't react. She just closed the notebook. And chose life, not performance. The stitching of loose threads. Smooth. Natural. No forced exposition, just revelation. The tail phenomenon was triggered by the same energy that resurrected Concepcion in layered memory form. The bonsai tree is not a tree, but a stabilized dimensional anchor, originally placed there by the old Chinese man. Mr. Willoughby has been guarding the balance between timelines since Book 1, always seen, but never understood. Brigsby did not summon anything. He was trying desperately to prevent Concepcion's reformation because he once loved her in a version of the timeline that no one else remembers. Clotilde and Eugenia are not just frenemies now, they are becoming the keepers of what the convent is slowly turning into. A crossroads. Final sequence, the sky fully tilts. Night falls wrong. The moon appears where no window faces. The garden lights by themselves. Everyone feels it, in bones, in teeth, in dream memory. She is here. Concepcion steps onto the convent lawn. This Concepcion is alive. Whole. A complete singular timeline version. And yet, still shifting at the edges, like reality isn't done engraving her shape. Chaos walks toward her without fear. She kneels. They touch foreheads, and the sky straightens back into place. Somewhere far away. Brigsby screams. Somewhere very close. The magic painting opens its eyes. Chapter 12. Where the edges of things stop pretending to be solid. The morning after Concepcion's return was not triumphant. It was quiet. The convent had that post-storm feeling, like everyone had been crying in different rooms, and now nobody knew who should speak first. Chaos sat at the kitchen table in his little pinafore uniform, because Dorothea still insisted it was charming, gender be damned. His bowl of oatmeal steamed under a roof beam dripping from last night's humidity. Gumbo was on his third peppermint candy of the morning, the wrappers fluttering like prayer flags near his coffee cup. Dorothea braided her hair, hands steady, face blank, but her eyes were lit with that slow-burning worry that only a mother whose child is different knows how to carry. No one mentioned the fact that everyone's tales were now gone as suddenly as they had come. The bonsai garden radiated a faint blue glow only visible in the corner of the eye. Concepcion had appeared, touched them, and then vanished again. Alive? Dead? Both? Neither? They didn't know. They did not ask. Not yet. Chaos's second day of kindergarten. They tried again. Of course they tried again. You don't give up after one miracle or one disaster. That's what families are. The school's playground was a battered seesaw, a chalk-stained hopscotch grid, and a slide that looked like it had been manufactured the same year humanity invented regret. Chaos walked through the gate, holding Gumbo's pinky because pinkies are sacred bonds when you are 5. But children notice difference like dogs notice storms. The whispers came fast. Why's he so light but his daddy's so dark? His mama looked like a man. Why his hair do that? Chaos didn't speak. He didn't have to. The rainbow happened all at once. Not a soft rainbow. A vertical curtain of shimmering light like stained glass melting into air, rising from the ground beneath the playground slide. It made the swings glow. It made the chalk drawings ripple. It made every child fall silent except the one who pushed him. The bully fell backward into the seesaw. Nobody was harmed. But teachers talk. Principals panic. And rumors grow faster than weeds in Gospel County soil. By afternoon, Dorothea was sitting in an office with a school counselor who smelled like cucumber melon body spray and disappointment. By evening, Chaos was being homeschooled. Dorothea didn't cry until the popsicles melted in the sink. Meanwhile, the convent political climate starts to burn. Mother Superior called an emergency meeting because she could feel the world bending under her feet. Father Lionel attended with his clipboard, pretending to take notes, though his pen never once touched the paper. Sister Eugenia sat stiff-backed, eyes sharp. Sister Clotilde leaned back in her chair, arms folded, tailbones still aching from the tail that no longer was. It only took 12 minutes for the argument to ignite. Clotilde. The child is touched. That is not a burden, that is call. Mother Superior. Miracles do not belong to the reckless. Eugenia. And who defines reckless, Mother? For a moment, just a flicker, Clotilde and Eugenia were one entity. Aligned. Dangerous. Bright with holy defiance. Mother Superior saw it. She did not like it. Something broke then. Something official. Something quiet. Something like a line on a map shifting 1 inch sideways. At the museum, where the real trouble was growing, Professor Voss hadn't slept. Loon paced. Merrick sat curled in a blanket like a war orphan. The painting was no longer a painting. It pulsed. Not to the rhythm of the heart, but to the rhythm of breathing. And then slowly it exhaled. When the mist cleared, he stood there. Professor Brigsby. Not in the flesh, but in the paint. Watching them. Smiling. Not menacing. Not furious. Just lonely in a way that made the spine sweat. He lifted one painted hand and beckoned. Voss whispered. He wants to pull us in. Loon whispered back. No. Somebody else is trapped in there. And then they saw it. Behind Brigsby. Barely visible. A figure made of pale light. Flickering. Reaching. A hand. With no shadow. Concepcion. The bonsai garden and the witnesses who shouldn't have seen. Germain walked the garden that night because he couldn't sleep. Mr. Pill followed because Germain shouldn't be alone. The old Chinese man followed because the world was turning again and someone had to hold the hinge steady. The glowing thing growing in the center of the bonsai ring was no longer a tree. It was a doorway. Soft. Shimmering. Alive. And when the wind blew, it whispered in Concepcion's voice. I'm almost back. End of chapter 12 cliffhanger. Chaos woke up at 3:17 a.m. He walked to the window. Outside, the garden glowed soft blue. And standing at its center, back turned, hair whipping in the wind, dress made of desert sand, Concepcion looked over her shoulder and smiled. Like she had never died. Like this was always the plan. Like the veil was only ever paper thin. Chapter 111. We were never meant to be alone here. The garden has grown strange again. Not just lush possessed. Vines like spun silver thread across the cloister walls, weaving shapes that resemble wings, halos, faces pressed in laughter or grief or both. Leaves shimmer with an oily lavender glow, and the roots coil like sleeping serpents beneath the soil. And the tails, yes, the tails are still there. The sisters, the novices, the postulants, all of them walking about with feline swishes of tufted fur, twitching reflexively when startled, betraying emotions better than their eyes ever had. No one speaks of it anymore. It has become one more impossible thing in a long line of impossible things. But something new has appeared. In the center of the garden, where the apple tree once stood, a growth has formed. Not a tree, not a bush, something architectural. A spiral tower of woven willow and bone and midnight blue flowers that pulse faintly as though they have heartbeats of their own. The toddler, little Maudlin, who has seen every timeline collapse and birth itself again without ever losing her delight for raisins, walks straight to it. She says only, "No." And the tower wilts. Tails drop off like autumn leaves. Everyone gasps as vertebrae snap back into place, spines unburden themselves, and fur dissolves into dust motes. The miracle is quiet. Not triumphant. A return to humanity with all its heaviness. Meanwhile, Kato sits in the malt shop. She's barefoot. She always forgets her shoes when thinking too hard. A strawberry shake sweats beside her as she stares at the condensation running down the glass like slow tears. Neon hums. Vinyl cushions squeak. The world is too gentle now, and that makes her nervous. She begins her monologue softly, half to herself, half to Sparky, wherever he is. I was never meant to be a mother. But I was. And I was never meant to be a saint. But God knows they tried to make me one. She remembers holding Gumbo and Dorothea, small warm bodies, mouths like blossoms learning to speak her name. She remembers the nightclub, the spinning lights, the heat of strangers' eyes, the music shaking the bones. She remembers Sparky's laugh, how it made even failure feel like a small joke whispered between conspirators of the absurd. Sean waits for me, she says, twirling the straw absently. And I love him. I do. But I don't know if love is enough to say yes to a future that feels already written. She considers returning to contemporary Christian music. The soft applause. The predictable melodies. The image of purity like a veil she never actually owned. No. I want something real, she says finally. I want to help people who don't believe they're allowed to be loved. Because, baby, that's all I ever was. Her decision is made. Not marriage yet. Not music as they want her to do it. She will build shelters, quiet places for the lost and the strange and the half-seen. Her purpose is not performance. It is refuge. She breathes out relieved. Near the convent gates, Sister Clotilde and Sister Eugenia circle each other like wolves with rosaries. Their feud, years old, layered with jealousy, misunderstanding, paranoia, finally breaks open when they both see her. Conception. A flash. A mist. The memory of someone who died across every timeline and yet stands beneath the willow arch as though she simply stepped out for air. Clotilde reaches toward her. Eugenia grabs her hand. Their argument erupts, ugly, fast, claws out real. Words old as wounds. Then the public humiliation. Clotilde's hidden letters revealed, her pride stripped bare. She collapses, not defeated, but finally honest. Eugenia kneels beside her, not as victor, but as sister. They are enemies no longer. They are the only two who knew what it cost to remember conception at all. And watching all of this, from far away, on the other side of the magic painting, Mr. Willoughby, the archivist of forgotten doors, the keeper of timelines that folded incorrectly. He has been stitching, undoing, preserving. The threads tighten. He whispers, "It begins again." And just like that, Sister Supreme appears in the garden as though she simply walked into the scene from offstage. No spectacle. No crack of thunder. Just her smile, crooked, tired, knowing every version of every story that ever mattered. She gathers the sisters close. She touches Cato's face. She looks at Maudlin, the toddler who undid a curse with a single word. She says, "The door has opened. Do not be afraid. We will walk through it together." The world has been calling them Maudlin because the garden itself misremembered them, the way dreams misname familiar faces. But the child, the core soul beating beneath timelines, has always been Chaos. Chaos the gentle. Chaos the one who unmakes curses by speaking a single word. Chaos who has died and been reborn more times than the convent has windows. So now we let the story acknowledge it. Chapter 112, Chaos remembers their name. The garden quiets after the miracle. The sisters stand in awe, hands touching their backs where tails once sprouted. The air smells like overturned soil and cold rain, though the sky is clear. Chaos, small, barefoot, curls like a lightning storm, looks up at them all with wide, bright knowing. Someone whispers, "Maudlin has saved us." Chaos blinks. Their voice is small, but it carries like bells. Not Maudlin. I am Chaos. The wind shifts. The silver vines curl inward, like bowing. Every timeline that had blurred the truth. Snap. Back into alignment. Sister Eugenia gasps, as though remembering an entire lifetime she did not know she had lived. Sister Clotilde reaches her hand to her chest, where a phantom tail had been a moment ago. And where a scar that once marked a different death is now gone. Their eyes meet. Their feud ends not because of apology, but because the weight that fueled it dissolves. They sit side by side beneath the willow arch, exhausted and softened, like survivors of a storm they can finally name. But the veil has already begun thinning. And the convent is not alone. Behind the oldest wall. In the corridor that was never built but has always existed. The painting of the seven sisters shrouded in dusk begins to ripple. Brushstrokes liquefy. Color breathes. And from the painted forest, stepping with the same ease one steps from shadow into lamplight, Mr. Willoughby emerges. Yes, that Mr. Willoughby. The keeper of the archived non-linear orphanage. From Book 1. The man who once taught Conception how to fold time like paper. His suit is older now. His eyes kinder. His pockets full of impossible keys. He watches chaos with the expression of someone who has been waiting so long to see a child remember who they are. Meanwhile, a sound like a hymn sung backward shivers through the brick. Someone else is entering. But not from the painting. From above. The chapel doors fly open as though pulled by an invisible tide. And Sister Supreme steps inside. No grand entrance. Just presence. Her veil flickers in a wind no one else feels. Her voice is a soft sword. The Brigsby matter ends tonight. The room chills. Because everyone remembers. The confrontation unfinished. The escape attempt. The gun fired but not killing. The loose thread that has shadowed every chapter since. Chaos takes Sister Supreme's hand. Their small fingers do not tremble. And elsewhere, the one who watches. In the rafters of reality, between the ceiling and the sky, someone is watching. Someone from before. From the first book. From the very beginning. Sparky. Not alive. Not gone. Something between memory and guardian. Cato feels him before she sees him. A warmth behind her ribs. A laugh half heard like a song she once danced topless to in neon smoke and too loud hope. She rests her palm over her heart. She knows. Thank you for getting me here. She whispers. And Sparky, wherever he is, smiles. Cato's choice is final now. Her purpose is clear. She will build a sanctuary where the lost can land. Not a convent. Not a church. Not a stage. Something new. Something alive. Something that understands that holiness is often feral. She looks at Sean not with hesitation anymore, but with the gentle, steady love of someone who knows that she can choose him. Without losing herself. The wedding is not now. But it is real. And it will come. Back to the convent. Sister Supreme lifts her hand. The veil, thin as mist now, tears open like lace. A corridor of night appears. They step forward. Chaos leading. Mr. Willoughby following. Clotilde and Eugenia side by side. Cato walking with purpose. Not afraid of the dark anymore. Because she knows. The dark is not empty. It's waiting. Chapter 113. The Corridor of the Split Paths. They step toward the corridor that Sister Supreme has opened. But Dorothea does not go with them. This is important. The story stops to acknowledge it. Dorothea is standing at the back of the chapel, one hand around Gumbo's, the other lightly touching Chaos's shoulder, the kind of touch that says, I nearly lost you once, and I will not risk that again. She watches Clotilde, Eugenia, Chaos, Sister Supreme, Mr. Willoughby, Cato, Lund, Voss, Merrick. All preparing to walk into that dream-thin hallway where Brigsby waits like a malignant riddle. Dorothea's voice is steady but low. I don't follow death. Not this time. Not with a child to raise and a husband to keep warm through winters. Gumbo squeezes her hand harder. His voice cracks like old floorboards. We stay. We guard the home fire. Chaos looks up at them, no protest, no sorrow, just recognition. Children who've lived across lifetimes do not need explanations. And so the party splits, but not in fracture. Instead, like a river branching into two noble veins. The corridor party, those walking into the veil. Chaos, small, barefoot, ancient. Sister Supreme, her veil whispering like a blade being sharpened. Sister Eugenia, jaw set, cigarette unlit but ready. Sister Clotilde, fingernails bitten to crescents, calm anyway. Cato, Heart steady, future chosen. Mr. Willoughby, keeper of keys to unbuilt doors. Lund, Voss, and Merrick, still mildly traumatized museum scholars. The home party, those who stay in the convent. Dorothea. Gumbo. Germain, bandaged but stubborn. The old Chinese man, whose real name no one has ever gotten right. Mr. Pill, who has begun brewing tea with the garden's strange vines, God help us. And floating between them all, like fog lit from the inside. Conception. Seen only for one half breath at a time. Alive and not. Dead and not. A ghost who chooses when her memory is allowed to hurt. The corridor itself. The group enters. The walls are neither walls nor air. They are fabric made of memory, patchwork scenes stitched from every version of reality that might have happened. A crucifix melts into a childhood tree. A kindergarten seesaw turns into the wheel of a hospital gurney. Flat Coke in a paper cup smells like incense. President Reagan flickers by in a television reflection, shirtless and inexplicably ironing something with perfectly inverted nipples. We mention it only once, as requested. Clodagh whispers. This place remembers what we would rather forget. Eugenia replies. Yeah, well, so do I. They walk deeper. Meanwhile, back in the garden. Germain and the old Chinese man are kneeling in the dirt. The thing growing in the bonsai garden is now visible. Not a plant, not an animal, not a statue, not an organ. It is an idea, growing roots. It looks like a branching silver antler, carved from moonlight and bone, pulsing as though it breathes. Germain touches it. And sees every moment he ever regretted, but without shame. The old Chinese man touches it. And begins laughing, big belly deep laughter, like he finally remembered a joke he spent 6 decades trying to recall. The garden is becoming a place where grief composts into prophecy. Dorothea watches from the steps, arms crossed, thinking. If this turns into a cult, I swear to God I will beat someone with a yardstick. Gumbo. Fair. Back in the corridor, Brigsby awaits. At the end of the passageway is a door shaped like a mouth that forgot how to scream. Professor Brigsby stands before it. His glasses cracked. His hands shaking with obsession, not madness. He has been waiting. He has been watching. He speaks to Chaos first. Do you remember me? Chaos doesn't blink. I remember who you were. But you don't have to be that anymore. Brigsby flinches as if struck. Because forgiveness is sometimes the most violent possible weapon. Sister Supreme steps forward, cloak like a falling cathedral. This ends. Here. Brigsby's eyes fill. He does not reach for a gun. He reaches for redemption. But redemption is not always granted. Not yet. Not here. Not without fire. Chapter 114. The door opens. Book 3 continuing. The door does not open the way a door should. There is no hinge. No handle. No creak or crack of wood expanding under pressure. It breathes open. A slow exhale of warm, desert-dry air, carrying the faint scent of frankincense, old leather hymnals, and a funeral parlor that forgot it was closed. Sister Supreme raises one hand, palm outward, and the corridor quiets. Even the air seems to hold still. Chaos holds Cato's hand tighter, not out of fear, but to keep her in this reality, tethered, grounded. Her pulse is fast, hummingbird fast, but steady. Brigsby steps back. His posture is wrong. Like a man who has lived too long in hallways that do not lead anywhere. The room beyond the door is not a room. It is a chapel that never existed or existed once, then was erased, then remembered in the bones of the building like an ache from an old wound. The altar is a table of polished stone. The magic stone. The one the toddler touched years ago, when language was still optional and miracles occurred like hiccups. But now it is taller and glowing and humming like a huge wasp nest of souls. And on the altar is the Watcher. At first, they seem like fog with a heartbeat. Then the fog turns, just slightly. Just enough. And we see the face. The face is Scott. The armless, legless, bewildered, nap-prone doofus from Book 1. Except, he is no longer armless. No longer legless. He is tall. Radiant. Not angelic. That would be too clean. He is something older. Something earned. Something that remembers suffering and did not trade it away. Scott speaks, but the voice is not entirely his. I told you I was waiting. And I told you I'd come back when the bones remembered my name. Sister Clotilde staggers backward. Her breath rattles. Scott? But you died. You died. You died in that thing with the wheelchair explosion. Eugenia. To be fair, he's died like 4 times. I gave up keeping track around the Tornado Cathedral incident. Chaos steps forward. His voice is gentle. He didn't die wrong. That's different. Brigsby collapses to his knees, not in worship, but recognition. Because Scott is not just Scott. He is the convergence. He is the one who has lived every version of every timeline, the only soul who remembers them all without breaking. He has seen Concepcion die in the sand, and seen her live in the kitchen making cornbread, and seen her trapped in the mirror behind the museum display glass, and seen her laughing in a hammock in Guatemala with fried chicken crumbs on her chest while yelling at Jesus on the cross statue for not fixing the humidity. All of these are true. All of these happened. All of these are real. Time is not a river. Time is a catfish, bloated, unpredictable, and deeply uninterested in being understood. Scott looks at Brigsby. You didn't ruin anything. You only tried to hold too tightly to what couldn't be kept. Brigsby sobs, that terrible, gasping, back-of-the-throat sob that sounds like a child begging the world to not let the night come. Chaos steps forward and places a hand on his shoulder. The room brightens. Meanwhile, back in the garden, Dorothea watches the strange antler vine heartroot thing pulse. Germaine is sweating. Mr. Pill is chanting in a language he definitely does not speak. The old Chinese man whispers. It is a gate. Dorothea. I swear if another gate opens I am calling a licensed exorcist. I'm too old for unregulated spiritual portals. Gumbo. We are the spiritual portals, babe. Dorothea sighs. Deep. From diaphragm. God help me, you're right. Back in the chapel of the Never-Built. Scott extends his hand, and the veil behind him ripples. And through it. Concepcion. Alive. Laughing. Running barefoot through reeds. Sand in her hair. A woven basket of pomegranates under one arm. Then, she flickers like a candle in wind. Here. Gone. Here. Gone. Here. Chaos whispers. We have to choose which world to hold. Sister Supreme's voice. Then we vote. Cato closes her eyes. Her lips tremble. I want everything. But I know we can't. Scott nods. Then we make one world. One timeline. One thread. No more doorways. No more echoes. No more deaths that undo themselves. Eugenia. You're saying we sew the story shut. Scott. Yes. But once it's sewn, it stays that way. Sister Clotilde's voice breaks, unexpectedly soft. Then we must decide what and who is allowed to remain. Chapter 115. The Split Begins. Book 3 continues, the thread phrase, the world's double. The chapel doesn't explode. It doesn't rumble. No lightning bolt cracks the ceiling, no choir of seraphs descends with trumpets and feather-shedding drama. It happens quieter than a blink. The air pulls inward, like the room itself is taking one deep, bracing breath. The way a person does when they know something irreversible is about to occur. And then the world divides. Not in half. Impossibility. Two timelines unfurl like ribbons pulled from the same spool. The world where Concepcion lives. And the world where Concepcion never returned. Both real. Both true. Both happening. The characters feel the split the way a child feels their first heartbreak. A dislocation at the center of the chest. Kato's hand is still in Chaos's. But now another Kato exists, one heartbeat to the left and the right. One with Sean. One without him. One with tenderness. One with fire. Dorothea gasps because she feels it most sharply. She has always straddled worlds, woman and man. Mother in body and mother by pact. Healer and heretic. Devout and defiant. The split lifts her cleanly. Like someone snipping a thread too taut. Her eyes fill. Gumbo watches her with that surprising, ocean's-deep softness that comes only from old men who have seen too much and still choose tenderness. You still here, darlin'? Dorothea nods, but the nod has slow motion ache in it. I'm here. Just so is the me that stayed. Gumbo. Then let her stay. And let you be you. I married this one. Chaos watches the split like a child might watch waves forming that no one else sees. He is 5. But also ancient. Kindergarten hasn't touched him yet. His curls are wild, his eyes enormous, his pinafore freshly ironed. From the split from the seam. Concepcion steps through. Not a ghost. Not a memory. Not a flicker.
Concepción alive.
Barefoot. Laughing softly, breathless from running through worlds. Hair messy with desert sand. Dress torn at the hem. Clothed is the first to break. Not dramatic. Not operatic. Just a sound like someone letting go of 10 years of tension at once. She falls to her knees. I didn't. I should have. Concepcion kneels too, steady, solid, living. Clothed. You loved me badly. But you loved me. I forgive the form it took. Clothed sobs. The kind that stains the inside of a throat forever. Sister Eugenia stands nearby, stiff as starched linen, pretending that she is not crying, while clearly crying. Kato places a hand over her mouth, quietly, beautifully undone. Sean whispers. She's real. Scott, still bright, still burning with timeline memory, answers only. She can stay. But the world will change to hold her. Brigsby flinches. Something crawls under his skin. Because the world changing means all his plans, all his fixations, all his elaborate, rusted control are scattering like birds at a gunshot. He bolts. No one stops him. Some evils have to run themselves empty. Meanwhile, outside, in the bonsai garden, the thing that has been growing finally blooms. It is not a plant. It is not an animal. It is a mouth. A round, slow-breathing, stone-edged mouth in the earth. Like the planet itself is yawning awake. Germain drops the pruning shears. Mr. Pell crosses himself, then crosses himself again, then mutters something in Latin even though he doesn't speak Latin, which has somehow been the theme with him. The old Chinese man nods, utterly calm, as though this is simply Tuesday. The world split, he says. Germain. How do you know? Old Chinese man. I've been waiting for it since 1954. My whole life is waiting. the mouth begins to whisper. No words. Just the sound of something remembering hunger. Germaine backs up. The ground pulses. And the tails, the ones so many at the convent just grew, sway as though they are tuning forks to some old ancient song. Something has awakened. And it wants something back. Back in the chapel. Concepcion stands beside Chaos. The chapel flickers. Half made of stone. Half made of memory. Sister Supreme studies herself. If we let the world stay split, then everything that has been broken can be both broken and healed. We will live in double truth. Scott nods. That is the cost. Cato whispers. Then let both be true. Because love is rarely singular anyway. The altar glows. The door remains open. But now it leads to both worlds at once. And each character will have to choose, slowly, over the chapters ahead, which version of themselves they will become. And somewhere, far outside the convent, across town, in a small, strip mall donut shop where the fluorescent lighting hums like an insect hive, someone is watching them. Someone we know. Someone we have met. Someone we forgot to fear. They sip coffee. They smile. It worked. Their eyes flicker gold. Chapter 11, The Soft Split. The air did not break all at once. It stretched first, like old honey pulling itself into a thread. Thomas felt it before he saw it, pressure on the eardrums, chest tightening, the hush that always came right before a summer storm. Chaos stood beside him, hands in his coat pockets, face uncharacteristically still. Cato was on the other side of the room, not quite watching, not quite avoiding. She had been humming under her breath again, not one of her old praise songs, not something rehearsed or once profitable. This was a raw chord progression pulled from a place she had never learned to name. Something before religion. Something after it too. The house itself seemed aware, like the beams knew language and the windows had memory. They were gathered in the living room of the farmhouse outside Jennings, the one Thomas used to think was haunted, or maybe blessed, depending on the day. Gumbo and Dorothea sat together on the couch. They held hands loosely, like people who had done the work of falling apart and falling back in again, not through miracle, but through choice and stubborn tenderness. Eugenia hovered in a kitchen doorway, stern and patient like a woman who expected to be proved right eventually, and was willing to wait for that moment forever. Lucy the black cat lay under the coffee table, tail flicking, eyes green as a balancing act between worlds. Chaos spoke first. It's thin now, he said. Not the door. The story around it. His voice was soft, almost reverent. This is the part where things could be rewritten. Or remembered. Thomas swallowed. His throat felt too narrow. You're telling me this was always leading here? Chaos shrugged one shoulder. Everything leads everywhere. That's the trouble. And the beauty. The soft thread of air thickened. The light in the room dimmed, not from darkness, but from depth. Like something enormous was approaching behind the world. Cato stopped humming. In those years, she said quietly, when I sang on stages with fog machines and earnest lights, I thought I was opening heaven. But it was just good audio engineering and a sales table in the lobby. She rubbed her forearm, slow. I found God again when I stopped looking where I was told he lived. No one doubted her. Not this time. Thomas looked at Dorothea, who had once run from one kind of devotion right into another. She squeezed Gumbo's knee. He nodded back with that gentle-as-a-bubble heart expression that always made the room less afraid. Eugenia crossed herself. She did it not out of fear, but respect. Chaos stepped closer to the invisible seam in the air. This isn't a door you walk through, he said. It's a door you allow. It splits when you're ready. Thomas asked, ready for what? The part of your life that began before your childhood ended, Chaos answered. It felt true. Not clear, but true. Cato moved to Thomas's side. She didn't hold his hand. She didn't need to. They had seen each other bleeding and not looking away. Whatever comes, she said, we won't pretend it didn't happen this time. No dimming it down to survive. He nodded slowly. Chaos placed his palm into the stretched air. It rippled, not with heat, not with cold, but with recognition, like two mirrors finally facing each other. Thomas felt a memory uncoil behind his ribs. The thunderstorm. The blackout. The shape at the foot of his childhood bed. The whisper that didn't frighten him. The name he never told anyone because it didn't sound real when spoken aloud. I remember you. The room did not split with violence. It opened like a curtain drawn back on a window that had always been there. The world on the other side was not another place, it was the same one, simply revealed. Cato's song resumed beneath her breath. Dorothea's fingers tightened around Gumbo's. Eugenia whispered a prayer whose words were older than her own church. Chaos smiled like a door himself. Thomas stepped forward, not through, but into. The split did not divide anything. It reunited what had once been separated. And the story, for the first time, began to tell itself. Chapter 12, The Place Where Names Return. The first sign that the veil was thinning again came quietly, the way a dream tiptoes back into daylight. It was in the bonsai garden, of course, because change always starts small, pretending to be gentle. The strange growth had continued. What had once been a neat, meditative arrangement of miniature trees now spiraled upward in soft, luminous coils of living wood. Branches had grown into shapes no gardener could have trimmed, arches, cradles, hollows, and rib-like curves that seemed to breathe. The leaves shimmered faintly in moonlight as though something beneath them remembered stars from another world. And it was there, in that waking green breath of the uncanny, that Thomas finally remembered himself. He stood among the trees at dawn, bare feet in cold dew, feeling something like déjà vu in his pulse. He couldn't say how long he had been forgetting his own story, how long he'd been drifting from one scene to the next like a guest in his own life, but the scent of sap and wet earth pulled something real forward inside him. A memory. A voice. A name. Sassy. Not the name of this world's cat, but the first one. The one who traveled with him across the edges of stories, across the soft light of impossible gardens, the one who had sat at the foot of beds and stared into the dark as if guarding him from the things that crawled beneath time. Sassy had never been just a cat. She had been a witness. And now she appeared again, not walking, not stepping, but forming out of shadow the way condensation forms on glass. For a moment she flickered between shapes, Sassy, Lucy, the archetype of the black cat who sees what humans can't bear to look at until the form settled into something simple, a sleek dark cat with slow-moving eyes. She sat at Thomas's feet. She blinked. Thomas exhaled. There he was again. Himself. Sister Dorothea and Gumbo, who had been arguing quietly nearby about whether the bonsai were whispering actual words or only feeling like they were, stopped mid-sentence. They saw Thomas standing there like a man just returned from a long and private war. Dorothea spoke first, her voice rough and honest. You remember again. Thomas nodded. Enough to know I lost track of too much. Gumbo put a hand on his shoulder, a grounding one, warm, simple, human. No mysticism necessary. Then don't run from it this time. Thomas almost laughed, because there was no running left in him. The garden itself seemed to breathe back. Elsewhere, Sister Clotilde and Sister Eugenia had reached a new and delicate alliance, carried not by affection but by need. The tales that had begun sprouting among the nuns and call center workers were no longer just oddities. They had started communicating. Flicks, curls, thumps, like another language waking up in their spines. Clotilde believed it was divine providence, God working in the musculature of the body to bring forth the next stage of grace. Eugenia believed it was a parasitic fungal spore from the bonsai roots insinuating itself into the nervous system. They had agreed not to kill each other over this difference of interpretation, progress. And now they kneeled side by side in the bonsai garden, peering into the strange new growth as though consulting a cathedral of living wood. The branches moved, just slightly, toward them. "Do you feel that?" Eugenia whispered. Clotilde didn't answer right away. Her eyes were wet, though she would deny it later. "It remembers us," she said. Meanwhile, miles away, the city museum's lights flickered under a bad transformer hum. Professor Brigsby's shadow paced through the mineral gallery, watching the faint glow of the mirror stone, where the armless, legless Scott flickered in like a bad television reception, muttering riddles about doors and debts and the cost of returning. And somewhere higher up, watching it all through some unseen vantage point, Mr. Willoughby leaned back into an armchair that wasn't wholly furniture, but part memory, part geometry, part echo. He had been here since book 1, just out of focus. A librarian of unfinished destinies. A keeper of the threads when characters forgot themselves. He saw the veil thinning. He saw Sassy return. He saw Thomas remember. He exhaled, almost fondly. "They're finally ready," he murmured. But the heart of this chapter belonged to Cato. She sat in the malt shop alone, stirring a milkshake she wasn't drinking. Neon lights flickered blue and 2am, soft across her face. She thought about the baby she had carried for Gumbo and Dorothea. The cigarette-burn glow of dressing rooms backstage when she used to dance topless. Sparky, her best friend, whose absence still lived like a bruise under the ribs. Sean, and the strange gentleness of loving him. The way every future had begun to feel like a hallway lined with mirrors. She had considered returning to contemporary Christians singing the applause, the shine, the illusion of redemption for hire. But she was tired of performing salvation. What she wanted was to live. Not pose for living. Not rehearse it. Not argue it. Just live. She looked at her reflection in the chrome napkin holder. "All right," she whispered. "Then we go forward. Not perfect. Not clean. But true." And as if timed, as if orchestrated, as if the world itself had been holding its breath, the bonsai garden bloomed. Not with flowers. With memory. Branches unfurled like corridors. Leaves shook like pages. Roots pulsed like heartbeat drums. And every tail flicked downward, stilled listening. The garden was telling them something. Not a prophecy. Not a warning. A return. A reintegration. The story had stopped branching outward. It was curling back toward the beginning. Toward the first dream. The first wound. The first opening door. Thomas placed his hand on one of the living arches of wood. His voice was steady. "It's time we finish this." The cat Sassy, Lucy, guardian, witness, walked ahead into the hollow formed by the trees. The door was open. And this time, no one hesitated. Chapter 13, The Hollow Where Memory Lives. They entered the garden's hollow the way people walk into a confession booth, not sure if they were about to be forgiven or found out. The arch of living would bent low, so even Gumbo had to duck, and his tail, which he refused to acknowledge, though everyone else saw it swaying like a metronome of irritation, twitched as though greeting the air inside. The space beyond wasn't large, but it felt deep, like the beginning of a cave, or the throat of a story about to speak. The walls were roots. The ceiling was leaves. Everything shimmered with a soft, pearly green glow, like bioluminescence whispered instead of shouted. And in the center, where the ground gently dipped, there was a pool of water, still enough to look like glass. Sassy sat beside it, watching, always watching. Thomas knelt first. The reflection in the pool was not his current face. It was the face he had before, all the way back in book 1. Softer, more hopeful, less fractured, worn but open. He felt something ache in him like an old scar waking up in the cold. "It's showing us who we were," Dorothea murmured, voice low, reverent without trying to be. "Or who we thought we were," Gumbo corrected, because Gumbo always anchored things when they tried to float away into symbolism. Dorothea leaned into him gently, forehead to shoulder, like the reassurance of two animals who came into life together and never stopped choosing each other. Sister Clotilde and Sister Eugenia stood side by side behind them, awkward, stiff, bonded by the kind of alliance only war or miracles can glue together. Clotilde's tail flicked once, Eugenia's curled twice. They understood each other now without speaking. Remarkable what crisis does. Outside the hollow, the world had not stopped. At the call center, nuns and telephone workers were adjusting to their tails like it was just the next thing on the list. Learning how to sit, how to walk, how to hide them under habits, skirts, or trousers. There was a brief black market trade in modified undergarments. No one admitted it, but everyone assumed Sister Perpetua started tying bows on hers. The panic had softened into inconvenience. But the bonsai's glow? That was another matter entirely. People could feel it now, like a hum in the spine, like a memory of a song they hadn't learned yet. And far away, Professor Brigsby was pacing his lair. Merrick, Voss, and Lund were still there, alive, tied to chairs but fed, because Brigsby was unhinged but also sentimental in a very specific way. His shadow stretched across the walls like something not wholly attached to him. He stared at the same mirror stone that Thomas had once used to cross time and memory and world. Scott flickered inside it, armless, legless, eternal, bemused. "You can't outrun your unfinished business," Scott said, in that strange voice like someone speaking into a fan. Brigsby's jaw tensed. "I'm not trying to outrun it. I'm trying to correct the narrative." "Same thing," Scott replied. The mirror stone pulsed. The garden pulsed. The world leaned closer. Back in the hollow, the water stirred. Not by wind. Not by movement. By recognition. Sassy stood up. Her fur shimmered once, like glitter catching dawn. Then she stepped into the pool. Her paws made no ripples. She turned to look back at them, all slow, knowing, ancient. Thomas understood first. This is it. The place everything split from. Dorothea's voice trembled, just a little. The moment we broke the story? No, Sassy seemed to say without words. The moment the story broke us. The pool brightened. A single tree root above them pulsed like a heartbeat. The hollow warmed. Something began to open. A memory. A timeline. A wound. A doorway. Meanwhile, Cato was standing outside the malt shop now, the night air cool against her bare arms. She had made her choice, life, real life, messy life, and she felt that choice sitting in her like a clear bell. Sean was waiting down the street, leaning against a lamppost with his hands in his pockets and his heart shoved up in his throat like a teenager again. Cato walked to him. No melodrama. No speech. Just her hand finding his. Home, not as a place, but as a direction. The pool brightened again, and this time, it showed someone watching from the other side. A face. Familiar. Half-lit. The kind of face that had been waiting in the corner of every room they didn't want to look too closely into. Mr. Willoughby. Not a villain. Not a savior. Something older and stranger. The archivist. The rememberer. The one who keeps threads from tearing apart. He spoke without moving his mouth, his voice everywhere and nowhere. The door is open. You may return. But understand, memory heals only what you are willing to feel. The water stilled. No one moved. The whole world held its breath. Thomas reached out. But chaos, yes, chaos, that name was right, always had been right, tiny and bright and alive and absolute, stepped forward first. His tail flicked once. He smiled. And the pool answered him like a universe recognizing its own child. Chapter 14. The Door That Remembered Us. The pool did not explode or roar or flare like holy cinema. It simply shifted, like a pupil adjusting to light. The hollow around them warmed, and every leaf on every branch held still, as though bowing. Chaos stood at the water's edge, small hand lifted, not trembling, not frightened, just present. Whole in a way most adults never manage to remain. The water rose upward, not like a wave, but like a veil being drawn from a mirror. And behind it,
Concepción.
not translucent, not ghostly, not quite solid either. Her hair moved as if underwater, not wet, just floating in some softer gravity. Her eyes were tired, but not defeated. Her smile belonged to someone who has seen all of life's cruelty and somehow still finds the joke in it. Gumbo exhaled her name like he had been holding it in his lungs for years. Dorothea took one step forward, then another, stopped herself. Grief is a muscle memory. Sometimes the memory comes before the truth. Concepcion looked at all of them, but her gaze rested longest on Chaos. You did it, she said. You grew. Chaos nodded once, solemn as a priest in a comic strip. Are you alive? Germaine asked, voice cracking halfway through the last syllable. The answer was the kind that gets caught in the throat before the brain can sort it. Concepcion spread her palm open. And it was sand. Egyptian sand. The fine, ancient, whispering kind. It poured through her fingers and landed nowhere. I died, she said simply. More than once. But death is a door. I just kept finding the wrong handle. Clotilde chuckled, not because it was funny, but because shock has to escape somehow. Sister Eugenia whispered, Lord have mercy, in the cadence of a woman who has watched miracles wrought and disasters bloom, and no longer knows which is which. Meanwhile, miles away, in Brigsby's lair, Voss had started working at the knots on his wrists, small panic giving way to problem-solving. Merrick was quietly humming under his breath, a tune that had no melody but kept his mind from turning to water. Loon stared at the mirror stone where Scott flickered, hollow-eyed, serene and insane like a saint carved from taffy. Brigsby paced. He was unraveling the way thread unravels from an old sweater, calm 1 second, wild the next. He muttered. They broke the timeline. They broke the character arc. They rerouted the river. I have to realign. I have to rebind. I have to return her. Scott blinked, slowly, theatrically. You're trying to edit life like it's your dissertation again, he said. Brigsby snarled. Life needs revision. People need structure. Voss coughed, dry, pointed. And how's that working out for you, Professor? Brigsby's hand twitched toward the drawer where the revolver slept. Back in the hollow, the pool brightened again. Sassy sat beside Concepcion now, as though she had always been beside her, in every lifetime, in every echo. Chaos stepped into the pool. The water did not wet him. It welcomed him. Gumbo's heart nearly shattered right out of his chest. Dorothea reached for his hand, found it, anchor to anchor. The pool began showing them their memories. The night Cato danced topless under neon and grief. Gumbo's first bone sale on Etsy that somehow funded the convent roof. Germaine's breakdown behind the maintenance shed, where the old Chinese man simply handed him a bottle of tea and said, "Hold the world more gently." Sean crying in the choir loft, thinking no one would love him enough to stay, and Cato being the one who did. The time the bonsai garden first hummed. The moment Concepcion died in the desert, sand swallowing her like a soft-handed god. The timelines where she didn't die. The versions they never lived. The versions still possible. Clotilde wiped her eyes without comment. Eugenia pretended she had allergies. This was memory without the poison of nostalgia. Clean. Painful. True. And then, just as the moment reached its warmest point, the garden shook. Not like wind. Not like earthquake. Like something knocking. Chaos turned his head slowly. And the whole hollow went dark. Not black. Dark. The kind of dark that has texture. The kind of dark that has depth. The kind of dark that watches back. A voice spoke. Not loud, not whispering. Just here. He found the mirror. Concepcion's face flickered, Sassy hissed. The water shivered like breath on glass. Gumbo said, Brigsby. Chaos's tail went rigid. Dorothea whispered, we have to get them out of there. Sassy turned her golden eyes directly into Thomas's. Then you must choose who goes first. The pool brightened, splintering into paths, each one a timeline, each one a cost. Everyone froze. Because choice is only easy when it doesn't matter. Chapter 15: The Rescue, the rewrite, the snack break that wasn't really about snacks. The paths in the pool branched like veins beneath skin, fragile, shimmering, alive. Each thread led to a version of the future. Each one demanded a price. Chaos stared at them with the solemn intensity of a 5-year-old deciding which cookie to eat first. Sassy, perched beside him, swished her tail with the resigned air of someone who has dealt with protagonists before. Gumbo whispered, this feels like a munchkin choosing which yellow brick road to follow. Dorothea snorted softly. That movie lied. Roads don't guide you. They reflect you. Also, nobody tells you about the munchies afterward. Germaine shrugged. Depends what you're eating. And right there, bless him, Sean pulled from his backpack a small Tupperware container labeled in Sharpie. Do not eat, because last time it had not gone well. Inside, edibles. Cato slapped his shoulder. Why would you bring those to a sacred metaphysical event? Sean blinked. Because everything's a sacred metaphysical event. No one could argue with that. But beneath the easy humor, something sharp was working its way in. That darker voice, the one that had spoken when the hollow dimmed, still hummed around them. It reminded them of hospital curtains drawn too tight. It reminded them of whispered diagnoses. It reminded them of Munchausen by proxy, that quiet, insidious cruelty where a caretaker needed someone weak to feel powerful. Brigsby. The man had been doing it to timelines instead of children. Hurting fate just to be the one who could fix it. And the mirror had finally given him the leverage he wanted. Thomas rubbed his jaw. If he's rewriting them, he can unname them, unhistory them, erase the parts where they had any say. Dorothea's voice cracked. We just got Concepcion back in some form. I'm not losing her again. Chaos, who rarely spoke unless necessary, lifted his chin. We will go in. But not all of us. Some must stay. If everyone crosses, the door will collapse behind us. Silence fell like snow. Sassy hopped onto the moss stone in the center of the group and meowed once, sharp. Chaos translated, completely straight-faced. She says, no heroes. Heroes die. We need living witnesses. Gumbo exhaled. Which means we choose. The pool's light flickered and sorted itself into 3 possible rescue teams. 1. The fighters Dorothea, Germaine, and Merrick. 2. The tricksters Thomas, Cato, and Voss. 3. The ones who speak truth to madness, Gumbo, Sean, and Sister Eugenia. But the trick was, only one group could cross. And whichever group crossed would not return the same. Chaos looked at all of them with the kind of tired wisdom normally reserved for people much older, much sadder. Brigsby will expect force. He will expect cleverness. You cannot save the world by beating someone who thinks the world is his manuscript. He pointed at Gumbo. You have to talk to him. Gumbo froze. The big man who had never asked to lead anything, who had learned to carry grief quietly so others didn't have to. Dorothea touched his shoulder. Talking is what you do best. You make space for people to unclench. Gumbo said, voice unsteady, but what if I say the wrong thing? Sassy patted up his chest like a tiny, indifferent god and pressed her forehead to his. Chaos spoke again. Then the world ends slower, and we try something else. No comfort. Just honesty. The real kind. So it was decided. Gumbo, Sean, Sister Eugenia would enter the mirror realm to confront Brigsby. Everyone else would guard the door, Because a door is most sacred when it is not yet closed. Germain reached for the edibles. Should we? Dorothea slapped his wrist. Absolutely not. Sean shrugged and popped one in his mouth anyway. For courage. Gumbo sighed. For judgment. Sister Eugenia crossed herself. For mercy. The hollow brightened. The mirror rippled open. And reality split like paper. They stepped through. The world on the other side was Brigsby's mind, but rewritten like a children's book left in the rain. Pages stuck together. Colors bleeding into one another. Munchkins with hollow button eyes marching in circles chanting, "Everything is fine, everything is fine, everything is fine." A candy house that smelled like antiseptic wipes. A school playground where every swing hung perfectly still. The kind of place that was supposed to be whimsical. But whimsy under force is horror. Sean whispered, very softly, "I think the munchies were a mistake." Sister Eugenia didn't glance at him. That depends entirely on how we define mistake. Gumbo swallowed hard. We find him. We don't fight him. We don't try to break him. We remind him he's not the author. The Munchkins noticed them. Their heads turned slowly. All at once. And in eerie, sing-song voices. "He's editing you." The air shivered. The ground tilted. The sky cracked. And Brigsby stepped forward. Smiling a smile made of glass. Chapter continuing. Sister Clotilde had always carried a suspicion about the kitchen. It was not the food itself, though the meals had taken on a strangely sweet smell lately, but the way Sister Eugenia supervised the distribution. Clotilde noticed who received extra, who received less, who received nothing, and how Eugenia's eyes tracked these small inequities like a ledger balancing in her skull. The younger postulants whispered half-jokingly that Eugenia treated the dining hall like Oz and the sisters like her personal brigade of munchkins, each one expected to hum and skip along in her candy cane choreography. But there was no skipping here, only obedience. And something about the sweetness had begun to ring alarm bells. Because the sweetness was not just sweetness. One afternoon, Clotilde followed Eugenia into the pantry, not sneaking exactly, just trailing her in silence as though conversation might have been expected. The shelves were lined with bags of flour, rice, dried lentils. And tucked behind them, a padded mailer of commercially packaged edibles, gummy bears, chocolate chews, pastel macarons that shimmered like lacquered fruit. Not ordinary candy. These were dosed. Precisely. Consistently. Clotilde watched as Eugenia measured out one, just one, and placed it inside a small paper wrap, sealing the edges carefully, the way one might wrap a sugar cube meant for a deer in winter. "So that's how you've been keeping them quiet," Clotilde murmured. Eugenia didn't jump. She didn't turn. She only tied the twine around the paper parcel and placed it into a wicker basket, among loaves of bread. "It isn't poison," Eugenia said. "No one has died." "That's a low bar for care," Clotilde answered. Finally, Eugenia faced her. They were close enough now that Clotilde could see the veins in her eyelids, the small quiver at the corner of her mouth. But the expression she wore was not guilt, it was effort. The effort of someone trying to keep a dam from breaking. "You think I am hurting them," Eugenia said. "But I am trying to keep them here. To keep them rooted. The veil is thinning. It has been thinning for months. The dreams. The visions. The sightings of Concepcion in the corner of the eye. You think that is happening only to you?" Clotilde swallowed. "You're drugging them to keep reality from splitting," she asked. "I'm not drugging them." Eugenia's voice cracked now, just for one breath. "I am buffering them." A silence fell that felt padded, insulated, like a confession booth thick with incense. "You do realize," Clotilde said softly, "that this is exactly how Munchausen by proxy works. Keeping people sick just enough so they can't leave, so they need you. So they depend on you to tell them what's real." Eugenia's eyes flickered. "Private wound. Private rage." "They already depend on me," she said. "Because I am the only one who sees what's coming." Clotilde thought of the mist-shaped outline she had seen just that morning by the chapel doors, the brief silhouette of Concepcion clutching her rosary, like someone drowning clutches a rope. Gone before Clotilde could blink. She thought of the sound, the faint bell, not from any bell in the building, but something deeper, lower, like a submarine calling from beneath an ocean floor. "We need to tell Sister Supreme," Clotilde whispered. At that, Eugenia laughed, not kindly. "A bark, a spark. You think she doesn't already know?" she said. "She is the one listening for the breach." Clotilde felt cold in the ribs. A chilled clarity. "Then what do we do?" Eugenia stepped closer, no longer enemy, no longer exactly friend. Something stranger. Something truer. "We do not escape," she said. "We prepare." A sharp noise shattered the quiet, running footsteps from the corridor. A young postulant burst in, face white as bleached linen. "They're here," she gasped. "The Watchers. The ones from the Brigsby incident. They've found us." The air changed. Clotilde felt it like pressure in the skull. Eugenia's hand went to the basket, not for the edibles. For a small iron key sewn into the lining. She looked at Clotilde with the calm of someone who had been waiting for this exact moment to arrive. "It's time." Clotilde nodded. No hesitation now. Frenemies had become something else entirely. Partners. And somewhere in the hallway, just at the corner of vision, Concepcion flickered like a candle in a breeze, half there, half not, her lips forming a single silent word. "Run." Continuing. The hallways of the convent never felt long until running through them became necessary. Clotilde and Eugenia moved fast, long habits snapping like flags behind them, while the postulant stumbled ahead, breath hitching, shoes slapping stone. At the stairwell, something stopped Clotilde cold. A smell. Butter. Sugar. Toasted pecans. Sister Dorothea, Pauladine in a wimple as the novices sometimes muttered with fond irreverence, was standing in the center of the corridor holding a tray of warm pecan pinwheels. Fresh baked. Soft. Sticky. Impossibly ill-timed. Her smile was beatific and unbothered, like the building wasn't trembling with unseen threat. "Bad morning for pastries?" Dorothea asked. Eugenia didn't break stride. "They've come. From Brigsby." Dorothea's smile softened into something older. Something that remembered. She set the tray aside, very gently, like placing a baby down, and wiped her hands on her apron. "Then we must go," she said. "Gumbo is already outside with the truck running." Clotilde blinked. How did he know? Dorothea gave a shrug that was almost Parisian. "Love knows." Or maybe the dog barked. Hard to say. They ran again. Outside, the world was brittle with late autumn light. Leaves blew across the courtyard in spirals, pinwheel spirals, caught in a crosswind that made the air shimmer slightly, like heat rising off asphalt. But it wasn't heat. Not quite. More like reality thinning at the seams. Gumbo was already in the driver's seat of the old Ford, fists tight on the steering wheel, jaw set in that way of his that suggested he had once been capable of violence and had survived it long enough to age. Clotilde, Eugenia, Dorothea, and the postulant piled into the back. Before the truck could lurch forward. Gunshot. It cracked the air like the sky itself split. Clotilde fell back against the side of the truck, breath gone, vision white. For a heartbeat she thought she had been hit, but it was Eugenia who collapsed against her, clutching her own shoulder, blood blooming like stigmata through her sleeve. Not divine. Just mortal. Painful. Real. But the timing, damn the timing, felt symbolic. Like the wound predestined. Clotilde wrapped an arm around Eugenia, pulling her close. Eugenia didn't cry out. Her teeth clenched, eyes burning like a furnace window. "Drive," she hissed. Gumbo slammed the truck into gear. As they sped down the gravel road, Clotilde looked back. There, standing at the edge of the courtyard, was him. Not a guard. Not one of Brigsby's men. The Watcher. From Book 1. Mr. Willoughby, Except not quite Mr. Willoughby. The way one might not quite be themselves when writing under a pen name, same essence, different presentation. A mask of identity rather than a body. He looked exactly like he had then, pressed gray coat, hands folded in front of him, calm as though observing a museum exhibit. He had always been watching. Never interfering. Never speaking. Now he raised his hand, not waving, simply indicating that he acknowledged their escape, that it was permitted, or expected, or necessary. The veil between worlds flickered like a torn film reel. And in that flicker, just behind Willoughby's left shoulder, Clotilde saw Concepcion again, face half shadow, half light. Her expression held no terror this time. Only urgency. A message with no voice. Not every pursuit is chased by the living. The truck hit pavement. The convent shrank in the rear view. The world stretched ahead in a long ribbon of unknown. Eugenia's bloodied hand gripped Clotilde's forearm. "You know what's next," she whispered. Clotilde swallowed hard. Her voice came out ragged, but true. "Yes, the push-posh tea room on the North Highway." Dorothea nodded. "The one with the floral wallpaper and the weird porcelain clowns." "And the basement," Clotilde added. "The basement," Eugenia echoed. "Where the fracture in the veil had first begun. Where this all started. Where it all had to end." The truck drove on, wheels humming beneath them, like a prayer, like a warning, like a countdown.